o'clock p.m. And I'll say first off, tonight's a special night. We are thankful to have the attendance of members of the Narberth Planning Commission as well with us to address one of the initial items on the agenda. I'll get to that in a moment. So this meeting might go a little differently from normal, but the basic ground rules do still apply. Jillian, if you want to give your introduction on the slide, or are we doing that tonight?
No, I can provide that now. 1 second, let me share my screen.
And we'll come back and cover adopt our minutes as well as the roll call and attendees.
And do we need to promote the members of the Narberth Planning Commission to panelists so they're participating with us?
Yes, I was going to do that just after we kind of go over procedures for public participation, so everyone knows how to participate. So public participation. The public's attending the meeting as attendees. The public will be able to view and hear the Planning Commission, but will not be able to speak until the Planning Commission chair indicates that public comment is being accepted. Public comment will be accepted on all agenda items. If you wish to comment or ask a question, please raise your hand by selecting the hand icon. There's an image right here showing what that looks like. If your question is answered or the comment is no longer relevant, you can deselect the hand icon to lower your hand. Staff will unmute attendees when it's their turn to public comment at lowermerion.org to request participation. So this time, I think we would ask that the individuals join us for the Narberth Planning Commission raise their hand, and then we will elevate you to panelist.
And while you do that, Jillian, I'll acknowledge the presence of Lower Merion Planning Commission members this evening, along with myself, Scott France as co-chair. We are also joined by George Ross, Bill Cook, Jerry Stern, David Rosenbaum, and Adam Podowitz-Thomas. We do not have the presence of Tim Matthews tonight, who had to attend to emergent matters. Tonight, just to go over the agenda, we have 3 main items, beginning with a joint discussion of the 3 Elmwood Avenue sketch plan proposal. That will be followed by, on the Lower Merion side, a tentative sketch plan for 21 and 25 Rock Hill Road. And if time's permitting at the end, we'll enter into a discussion on possible fencing standard amendments to the zoning code. So I think if we have all of Narberth's planning members with us, I'll hand the virtual microphone over to Commissioner or Chairman Bressi, if you'd like to do any preliminary business with your board.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for joining with us for this meeting. I'm not sure that all of our commissioners, I see, I'd like to do a roll. So first of all, I guess I should formally call our meeting to order as well. The December meeting of the Narberth Planning Commission. For the public, we will start on this platform, and after this agenda item is complete, we will shift over to our normal platform, and the whole meeting will be viewable via the Narberth Civic Association YouTube channel. Just to make sure our commissioners are online, we have Heidi Boyce, I see, Dave Brower, Jim Spear. Jim Cornwell, are you? Have you joined us yet?
I'm not seeing him in the participants list unless he is one of the phone numbers.
Okay, well, when he joins, when he arrives, would you please make sure to elevate him to a participant?
Yeah.
Okay, but we do have a quorum, so we can proceed. That's all for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. One bit of business is the minutes from the last meeting on November 2nd, 2020 for Lower Merion Planning Commission. Do we have any comments on those minutes that were distributed in the packet from board members? And if not, do I hear a motion?
I'll move that we accept the minutes as written.
And second?
I'll second.
Jerry Stern. All right, all in favor of adopting the minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? And
Scott,
motion
just for the
passes.
record, I want to note I'm abstaining just because I wasn't at the meeting. So just
Oh.
only that reason. So.
Thank you. We'll note that. Okay, so let's move to the first item, and this is going to be an interesting exercise, hopefully very fruitful, and I appreciate everyone's efforts in making this work or seeing how we fare. As everyone knows, this is to do with a tentative sketch proposal on 3 Elmwood Avenue. It's a unique tract that crosses municipal boundaries with some area in Lower Merion Township and a larger area in Narberth Borough. That's the reason for us being together tonight. There have been some conversations and also some guest visits to previous planning commissions from both boards as we have geared up for reviewing this proposal and the complex issues as far as how to treat it with a multi-municipal impact as follows. So in a moment, I'm going to hand it over to our staff. Jillian's going to give the staff overview. The way we've kind of envisioned this working tonight, and we'll adjust as necessary. But like I said, Jillian will give an overview. We'll invite representative of Narberth if they'd like to give additional overview on their perspective. And then there'll be time for questions from board members to both the applicant themselves who are with us tonight, as well as staff for further clarifications. And then the deliberation, it will obviously will take two paths. One is in Lower Merion, the other in Narberth. And the way we have it now, we have a set of recommendations or conditions of approval on the Lower Merion side. So we might go through that first and then give Narberth the opportunity to have their own discussion as well as be aware of the issues that we raise on our side as well. If that doesn't work, if we have ultimately have to split, if Narberth wants to return to the more independent domain to have their discussion, that's I don't see any problem with that either. So that said, I think we're ready to proceed with an overview of the proposal.
Just before Jillian starts, if I could I just want to provide just a little bit of framework of the cooperation between the staffs because this is so unusual. For the last month or so, Lower Merion staff has been working with Mr. Bressy from Narberth and Ms. Dobbs from Montgomery County Planning Commission to really look at this as to try to streamline this process. There's a lot of people, as you can see on our Zoom screen tonight. There's 2 planning commissions, and then there's 2. Ultimately, this is just an advisory body. This will get forwarded to both governing bodies of both Narberth and Lower Merion. Knowing that there's all those different entities involved, what the staffs have tried to do is to consolidate the information for you, to treat this like it's one application with 2 parts, which it really is. It's a split zone property. So we've tried to streamline that information to tell the same narrative as we've gone forward. One of the beginning things that we started with at first is to see if this is just a viable product. And we looked at this project from the beginning to say, well, is it something that requires waivers or variances or things that would make it unlikely to go forward? We're working off the assumption that this project has the ability to be approved. And as we're looking at this as it goes forward, with that, then understanding the concerns of both communities wasn't necessarily per se about the density because this is zoned multifamily in both communities. What the staffs have been working at and working towards is a resolution to issues of form. How is this going to look if it is constructed? When this first came forward, there was a plan that this would look more like 2 buildings that were very blocky and look like traditional multifamily development, something that would be across the street across Wynwood Road in Lower Merion Township. Working with the applicant and staff relayed concerns that come from Narberth and came from township staff with our observations that, well, should this project ultimately be built? Should it look more like homes that are already along Wynwood Road going down towards Narberth and then into Merion? So that's a direction where this has come forward. I think last month when the commissioner saw this was 2 buildings and it's morphed into 3 buildings now, but 3 buildings that look more like homes. So it seems to fit better into the landscape. So the form issues is really what's been driving that evolution of this project for the last month. So Maggie and Jillian have really understand the technical aspects of it very well, and I think Jillian will give the initial overview. We're here to answer a lot of your questions, but we wanted to at least go forward with that, with what our planning assumption is as we've been developing this.
Thank you, Chris. Like Chris said, I will provide an overview of the project, and I will also provide an overview of some of the issues that we highlighted in our memo that went out to the Planning Commission. So this application is located at 3 Elmwood Avenue. It's located within Wynwood and Narberth. It's a tentative sketch plan. The applicant's proposing the subdivision of 3 Elmwood Avenue to create 4 lots. Lot 1 is shown to maintain the existing single-family dwelling fronting on Elmwood Avenue, and lots 2, 3, and 4 are shown to contain the 3 new quad multifamily house buildings with a total of 12 residential units. And, sorry, one second. My panelists and 22 parking spaces are blocking my slide. The development is, as Chris said, located on a property that spans the Lower Merion and Narberth municipal border and is therefore subject to regulations and approvals in both municipalities. So you can see here on this graphic, the yellow line shows the location of the municipal boundary. To the right of it is Narberth, to the left of it is Lower Merion. Upon receipt of this application, staff met with the Lower Merion Township solicitor, and he advised staff to review the proposal as though the property were split zoned, applying setbacks based on the municipal location, and to consider the entirety of the development when considering bulk and mass requirements such as impervious coverage and lot area. As was said previously, Lower Merion and Narberth have 2 different zoning districts for this property. The front portion of the property, located in Lower Merion, is zoned MDR2, which is our medium density residential zoning district. And in Narberth, it is T3B, mixed residential limited. This is an image of the existing conditions, locations of East Wynwood, North Wynwood Road, and Elmwood, existing single-family structure. You can see here, kind of faintly through the aerial, that there is the east branch of Indian Creek traverses through the site, and this is a largely unimproved area to the left of that. This is a closer view of the existing single-family structure and an image of that. And then also the unimproved portion of the lot. Here are some images of that portion of the lot where the development is mostly proposed, showing some vegetation. And here is a site plan that the applicant has submitted. Again, it's the subdivision of the property to create 4 lots. Lot 1 maintains that house. Lot 2, 3, and 4 each contain what we call Lower Merion a quad, what would be understood in Narberth zoning as a multifamily house building. There's 4 units on each lot for a total of 12 units. And they are accessed through a driveway that extends off East Wynwood Road. Parking is provided in the rear of the structures, and then there is a driveway that extends out. The applicant has provided rough renderings of the proposed structures. This is a concept rendering for Lot 2, which is the center building, and then a concept rendering for Lot 3. As staff pointed out in our memo, there is a floodplain located on the property there. This is the east branch of the Indian Creek that goes through the site, and there is floodplain associated with that. Staff and a number of people had contacted staff concerned about the impact of the development on the downstream ecosystem, which has been the focus of enhancements made by the township to nearby Shortridge Park. Staff also notes that Lower Merion Conservancy has been working with Narberth Borough to improve water quality in this watershed. This is the location of the site and the entire watershed located there. The plan shows the property boundary within lots 1 and 2 to fall within the center line of the stream. And staff had expressed concerns that this could create challenges in coordinating maintenance for the stream and the associated riparian buffer. So as part of our review, staff had recommended conditions requiring the applicant to provide a maintenance and operations plan for this sensitive environmental area, provide access easements to Lower Merion Township and Narberth Borough to access the site for any emergency maintenance on an as-needed basis, and to investigate providing easements to a third party to monitor this portion of the site to ensure compliance with the maintenance and operations plan. Also, as the applicant develops a landscape plan, which is part of the preliminary plan requirements, staff will be looking closely to ensure that the 50-foot required riparian buffer is shown. And we have included a condition requiring the applicant to review the riparian buffer planting with Lower Merion Environmental Advisory Council and the Lower Merion Conservancy prior to the preliminary plan submission. I also would add that we would include Narberth's Environmental Advisory Council. I think at the time that we had drafted the memo, we weren't aware that there was one in Narberth, but I heard that there is one. It's 1 year old, and we would of course encourage their comment on this. Another issue that staff had identified in our review is the frontage of the buildings. It was important to staff that a comfortable transition be provided to allow for the residential development. We would assume that such transition would include a landscape verge, a 5-foot sidewalk, street trees, and foundation plantings. There is a difference between the requirements between Lower Merion and Narberth on frontage. The frontage falls within the boundary of Lower Merion, and there is a maximum setback of 20 feet. So the applicant has, on the site plan, shows the buildings a little bit closer with the porches encroaching. We've included a condition requiring the applicants to maintain the 20-foot setback so that the porches would extend 6 to 8 feet from that. And then the structure would begin.
Julian, you said maximum, I think you meant minimum 20 feet.
I think it is 10 feet minimum in Lower Merion and a 20-foot maximum for MDR2. Off the top of my head, I can check it. The other issue that staff pointed out in our memo was walkability and public gathering space access. Staff included a condition requiring the approval, requiring the applicant to work with Narberth Borough to investigate any improvements that could be made to the wooden bridge and sidewalk over the culvert located at the terminus of Elmwood Avenue. There is a bridge that is located right here at the terminus of Elmwood Avenue. You can see an image of it here. And we would like the applicant to work with Narberth to see what improvements could be made to increase walkability. So there are a number of waivers that the application requires from Narberth. There are no waivers that are required from Lower Merion at this point in time. That's staff's presentation on this. Does anybody have any questions?
Jillian, just before we hear from the commissioners, one thing I do want to remind the commissioners, this is just tentative sketch. This is a hard enough project to lay out the site plans of where the buildings, the driveway, and the subdivision goes. It's really, you're looking at this two-dimensionally. I'll just equate to that. This is really the purpose tonight is, it's a cartoon. Where should the buildings go on the site? Where should the driveways go? Where should the parking lots go? What should remain open space, and what should the subdivision look like? If this project achieves approval, it will then come back for preliminary plan. Many of the issues that we've received public comment on are really preliminary plan issues. People are concerned about traffic. People are concerned about stormwater. People are concerned about the riparian buffer, even the architecture. Those are issues that will really be resolved at preliminary plan. I don't want to try to push it off and say they're not important at this time, but first we need to really concentrate tonight on locking down what this sketch in front of us, this level of sketch looks like. That's why it's called sketch plan phase. So I thought that maybe if that can be helpful, that there will be another bite of the apple for this application. It's just not tonight where many of those issues will be heard, but to maybe help to tailor our discussion tonight, that we know that we don't have to solve everything tonight, but if we focus on making sure that the sketch plan is the best that it can be, would really be the best outcome we can get.
Thank you, Chris. And I guess I would also say these are the issues that staff had identified in our memo, and we do want to give an opportunity for someone from the Narberth Planning Commission to also speak to their issues.
Thank you, Jillian. I'd like to make a few comments as well. First of all, when I spoke before, I neglected to thank not only the commission for, the Lower Merion Commission for having us in this joint meeting, but also to thank the Lower Merion staff and its consultants for their assistance in reviewing this application and the great amount of work you've done to help us grapple not only with the issues that this raises for Lower Merion, but the issues that it raises for Narberth. I think we in Narberth have benefited from that partnership at the staff level as well, and I can't tell our public and our council member enough how important that's been for this process so far. So thank you both. In the spirit of what Chris and you have said, Jillian, I think in the conversations I've had with you on this and with our team and with the applicant, our solicitor has not given us as concrete direction as yours has about how to interpret how a zoning code applies over a lot that has that's in 2 municipalities. And our hope has always been, no matter what the actual legal interpretation of how that works is that this project would as closely as possible meet Narberth's zoning code throughout the site, whether it's in Lower Merion or not, because we feel that the preponderance of the site is in Narberth, and because of the configuration of this area, it has a great impact on Narberth. And to that end, I've encouraged, we do have a mixed use, multifamily house type, which this application is using as the form of the buildings that they are proposing to build. And I've encouraged the applicant team to walk around South Narberth to look at our housing stock, to try to understand the scale of things and the rhythm of things, and think about how they could work with that in their project. And so I think that what you see here tonight reflects that process of evolution of thinking about how this uses forms, scale, that you tend to find in Narberth. So that is part of the conversation that has gotten us to this point today. One technical matter I'd like to raise that didn't make it into your letter because we just discovered it over the weekend is because lot 2 is a corner lot, actually, in both the Elmwood and Wynwood road frontages at the corner are in Narberth, that this falls under a provision of our site planning code, which requires the determination by the zoning officer of the council of which street should be treated as the frontage for this development. It's a housekeeping matter, really, but that is one additional. It's not necessarily an approval, but it's a determination that Narberth has to make, and it's a determination that is made by the zoning officer or the council. So that is part of what the Narberth Planning Commission will be considering and voting on as a recommendation about that determination. With that, I think I'll just stop. I think that covers things.
Todd, can I ask one quick question?
Sure. There are a million people on my screen, so who is speaking actually?
This is Commissioner Bill Cook from Lower
Hi.
Merion.
Yes, sir.
You said that the property has two frontages on that lot too. I see the Elmwood one, but it looks to me like the Wynwood one is all in Lower Merion and not in Narberth. Just clarify that for me, please.
Well, the only way to clarify that is to look at the actual engineering drawings, which I did earlier today. I mean, I also discussed this with Chris Young, but the way earlier today too, to make sure that I was looking at the plans correctly. I see Jillian is helpfully. Can you zoom in on that at all, Jillian?
No, unfortunately I can't, but I can highlight something with my mouse if you'd like me to.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm reading it wrong, that's fine, but I think I tried to verify this.
It looks as if the Lower Merion line starts pretty much right at the corner of Wynwood and Elmwood, and then, you know, makes a lazy arc up towards East Wynwood Road. And that looks like the entire frontage on Wynwood Road to me. And I mean, we're just, you know, splitting hairs here, but I just want to understand it. That's all.
Yeah. I'm going to look actually while we're speaking at the actual unmodified drawing. It might be easier to see the lines. So maybe we can come back to that if that's okay with you.
No worries.
Just so you know, the Wynwood Road frontage is Lower Merion, with the exception of maybe the last 10, 15 feet that's up against the rail siding.
Right. It almost looks like there's an interesting jog that takes place where if the boundary continued straight, it would hit the curb on the frontage side or the Wynwood Avenue side, but then it jogs backward or zigzags further back towards Elmwood. So when it comes out, by my view, it looks like it's perpendicular to Elmwood Ave is where the lot or the municipal boundary is, if the plan is accurate. But we can look at that. I think it'd be a good time for any general questions for staff or anyone before we bring, and then keep in mind, we still have the applicant here. We'll still have public comment as well. So maybe any questions first for our staff, and then we'll move to bring the applicant and ask any questions for that person. And I can begin. I have a question for the Lower Merion staff, and possibly Joe who is with us as well. As far as the traffic pattern, I think as a sketch plan, it's a good time to look at that too. The memo notes that it does have the right turn exit onto the Wynwood Avenue lane, which is currently a right turn only lane. Are we making any, or can you sum up just from the engineering perspective and any, I don't know if anyone had discussion with PennDOT at this point over the implications of having these on Wynwood Avenue, and if any changes are going to be recommended for Wynwood Avenue to accommodate this development.
Sure. Just based on the preliminary discussions that we had, that the applicant actually has had with PennDOT and you know, with folks from our office, if this were to move forward and access was to be provided from Wynwood Road, the entrance and exit would need to be separated. The lefts in would need to be restricted, so you would only be able to turn right into the site and right out of the site. What we are suggesting in our memo to the Planning Commission at the tentative sketch stage is that if that were to be the case, in order to meet PennDOT requirements, we would want to reinforce that with some sort of physical barrier, a median in Wynwood Road to reinforce the fact that people cannot make a left out of the site because it would be a very tricky maneuver that close to the signal. We're also looking at the operation of the signal at Wynwood for any modifications that would need to be made to the intersection as a result of the development, and timing of the light, physical, geometric changes that may be necessary, and all that would be would be vetted once the traffic study is completed and they would go through the PennDOT process in order to get a permit for access.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that, Joe? Can you clarify whether that analysis would include consideration of where folks would turn around if they're not allowed to make a left-hand turn across Wynwood into the development? Clearly, folks are going to go down the street, turn around somewhere, and then come back up Wynwood. And so I'm very concerned about the traffic patterns for neighboring streets and the way that that's actually going to look. Because I mean, folks are going to pull both ways, and I happen to live in the neighborhood that's backing it, but I imagine folks are also going to pull into Narberth as well, and just how that's going to impact neighboring streets.
Sure, they have to look at origin and destination, so that would be part of it. And I did the same thing today just to get to Elmwood. You know, you do have to almost do a U-turn if you're coming from a certain direction to get there on Wynwood Road.
I had a comment or question. I guess it's sort of related to that. If you look at the staff memo under traffic, the township engineer has recommended that the transportation impact study focus on the intersection of North Wynwood Avenue and East Wynwood Avenue and the proposed driveways. I'm wondering, and I think this is part of Lower Merion, why they're also not looking at the intersection of Wynwood Road and Shortridge, because it would seem to me that would be a cut through that would take a fair amount of traffic into a residential area if they were trying to get up to Lancaster Avenue, closer to the city avenue.
Just bear with me 1 second and call the map.
Yeah, actually, if you could, since you have the map up, if you could show us, I assumed it was just, they were just looking at the driveways coming out there. And when you said that the intersection of North Wynwood Avenue and East Wynwood, is that where the new traffic light is?
That's where the traffic light is, correct. And
Okay.
and when we talk about including these intersections and the driveways in the study, it's basically for a level of service. We would expect there to be a level of service impact at those intersections, and we need to establish what the level of service would be, an acceptable level of service for the driveways themselves. So that's why we're including them in the study. Just because we say we're not including an intersection in the study doesn't mean that it's ruled out. You know, we're looking at transportation impact, and we feel that these are the intersections, the major intersections that would be affected by traffic, and we want to make sure that it's still efficiently moving through them. But that doesn't mean we've discounted, you know, the rest of town as a result.
Well, and where's the traffic count that would be taken?
The traffic counts would be taken on Wynwood, and we would do traffic count at the intersection. You know, we would do a manual count at the intersection.
Okay. I had one other question for staff. It requires some glasses. It's on the first page of the plan. I note that it said that there were no waivers that were requested of Lower Merion. But if you look at the first page of the plan, it says waiver requested from Lower Merion Township, Natural Features Ordinance 101-5C2A to permit.
So I can elaborate on that. Thank you for pointing that out. Actually, the applicant had requested that waiver, but the location of the slopes on which vegetation is shown to be removed are not located in Lower Merion. Therefore, we determined that was not required.
Is that a Narberth issue?
Yeah. So the slopes are located. I actually don't know. I believe it's back in this area, which is, you can see here, this is a municipal boundary.
Okay. That's all I had.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Jerry Stern. I have a comment and a question. The comment really isn't after the fact, but I'm just curious to get a response. In hindsight, it probably would have made more sense to adjust the boundary line between Narberth and Lower Merion so that it's coterminous with East Wynwood Road, and I'm assuming that that the current boundary is probably the old alignment of Wynwood Road, and that it was realigned at some point. That would obviously would avoid the split zoning issue, 2 tax bills, all the hours and hours of having to coordinate between the 2 municipalities as far as this plan, and who knows how many other plans may be coming down the road. So that's just a comment I have. And my question is, has to do with comment 25 on the staff memo. It was a condition that says that the developer should consider no natural gas connection. So my question is, what alternatives to natural gas does the developer have as far as providing energy, to this development?
Jerry, I can respond to that. So actually, that's a accurate assumption about the right-of-way line. I think that's exactly how the boundary line ended up there. That's the old alignment of the roadway. And regarding the sustainability condition, that is a standard condition that the Environmental Advisory Council has worked with staff to include in all of our land development applications. And I don't know if I'm the right person to respond about additional utilities accessible, but I know that this was the result of a lot of conversation amongst the Environmental Advisory Council, and this is the language that they felt was most appropriate for applicants and developers to consider.
Well, my concern is what would happen if the developers took this recommendation and said, okay, I'll provide oil heat. Oil heat is more polluting. It creates more greenhouse gases. And frankly, the township and the development would be worse off if oil heat were to be substituted for natural gas. So I don't understand.
I think you make a great point. I think we'll set up a separate meeting between the Planning Commission and the Environmental Advisory Council so you guys can coordinate that condition going forward. I think that's a good point. We'll report that out to the EAC and get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Sure.
Do we have any further questions before we bring the applicant up?
Are there any questions from the Narberth commissioners? I have one other question and a comment. The question has to do with the condition about the median. If it's better to talk about this later, just let me know. But I'm curious whether the traffic study would consider, if it's possible for the traffic study to consider the impact of the development with and without that left turn barrier. I would note that elsewhere, not far away on Wynwood Road, there's parallel parking, which often stops traffic on Wynwood Road. And I don't see why a few people making left turns would be much different than that. So I think that if the study can consider, if it's possible for a study to consider that, that would be interesting to me, to Narberth, I think.
If we only had the proposed roundabout, there wouldn't be any issues here.
That was before my time. And the comment is, in regard to that question about the corner property, our zoning code, it doesn't really matter where the boundary of the property goes, because some of the frontage is in Narberth on Elmwood Avenue. And so what that means to us, according to our code, is that our code says that when you have a property on a corner, and this is a property on a corner, the default is for the buildings, any building that's built there, to face the street which has the most buildings already. So that means in this case, the default would be for the building to be oriented towards Elmwood Avenue. Obviously that's not practical under the subdivision that's proposed. And the code does give our zoning officer and council flexibility to determine that an alternative orientation is appropriate, but it is a determination that just formally needs to be made. And so that's why I raised that point. And I think I've discussed that with the applicant, and there's a very simple condition they've actually drafted, which seems fine to address that issue. So we can get to that later.
Okay. All right, should we bring the applicant forward? Or, I'm sorry.
I'd like to make a comment about, a further comment about traffic impacts on Wynwood Road exiting this project as indicated in the plans. Am I right in assuming that the exit into Wynwood Road is into the specially designated right turn approach to the tunnel?
That's
Tunnel
correct.
under the track.
It's within the limits of the right turn lane, yes.
So is there the potential for conflict between vehicles entering Wynwood Road from the project to be in conflict with the queuing for that right turn through the tunnel?
Yes. The easy answer to the question is yes, and that's why that's why a transportation study is required.
Okay, I'm very eager to, insofar as there has been over recent years a great deal of concern about safety at that intersection, which has been partially addressed with the signalization of that intersection. I'm very eager to hear what your study reveals about that, because it looks like a nightmare in the making to me.
You're right, and I think that part of our review for at the tentative sketch stage was to, to limit the number of turning movements number of movements, physical movements that can be made so close to an intersection, and limiting it to the bare minimum and still providing access is probably a good place to start, because I don't think there's going to be able to be much more than that safely.
Jim raises an interesting point, and let me just delve into that a little bit, because I think what Jim is saying, and I think it's probably true, that a resident of this development coming out of the development and making a right-hand turn only would probably be forced to make a right onto East Wynwood Road, or I'm sorry, North Wynwood Road, or to immediately get in the left lane to go straight up North Wynwood or East Wynwood. And that is, as Jim said, a recipe for all kinds of conflict. So, because there's not a lot of linear footage between that entrance and the entrance to the tunnel. So that seems like a real problem.
I would also contend that the vehicular access to this project is the essence of this project. And to defer thoughtful review of it until a later phase is to misunderstand the impact that vehicular access is going to have on the community. This is the be all and end all of the 3 Elmwood Avenue proposal.
Can I bring up a related concern? Is my mic on? Hello?
Yes.
Hi, this is the other Jim from Narberth Planning. I'm concerned with the amount generally of paving on this site, knowing that there are severe flooding issues in this area, and there's a lot of issues with the open stream and runoff as it is onto neighboring properties, even onto neighboring blocks. So I'm concerned with the amount of parking paving in the rear. These they seem to be oversupplying the amount of parking necessary for 12 units. I believe Narberth would only require 12 spots in all, and they're supplying 22. I'm also seeing that among the waivers that are requested from Narberth is to essentially construct smaller parking spaces. And I would be curious whether the smaller parking spaces are allowing them to fit more parking on the one hand on the site, or on the other hand, is it allowing them to cut down on what would otherwise be necessary to pave on that site? And I'm not sure the balance there. I'd like to see a lot less paving on this site. And I'd also like to see a lot less parking on this site, frankly. I think it will cut down on the access issues to have fewer cars pulling in and out of this site. So those are general comments, I guess. I'm not sure where to find the answers for those, but it's the concern I have.
I can respond to some of that. In terms of impervious surface, there is a difference between what Lower Merion permits and Narberth permits. Lower Merion is at 50% and Narberth is at 60%. And this is one of these requirements that goes to a blended calculation, because it is a whole site issue. It's not a setback where you can say it's located in this area or that area. Regarding parking, it's interesting. We heard comments from both sides. We heard not enough parking and also too much parking. So in Lower Merion, the requirement is 2 spaces per unit, and in Narberth, the requirement, I believe, is 1 space per unit. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So that the applicant has kind of done a blended calculation to determine the required parking here. The applicant is showing tandem parking spaces in the back of the garage, in the proposed garage parking area, which are not being counted towards the requirement. I think the concern with parking that we heard is that there isn't an opportunity for overflow parking. And we wanted to make sure that there was some consideration for neighbors who may not want parking on side residential streets from that overflow.
And Lower Merion has some experience with a couple of these similar infill developments that have occurred over the last few years. And I think there's always been, as planners in the townships, always concerned about the same things Mr. Spears pointing out, trying to get a little, limited lot coverage where we can, getting stormwater recharge and water quality when we can. A couple of these developments we found, and I think people will be very familiar with these. These are new townhouse developments that went up on Montgomery Avenue. And now our new code doesn't allow these to happen anymore, but these were infill developments. One of them took place out by the Merion Cricket Club. So it's kind of a cul-de-sac to itself as 6 townhouses facing each other. With that site, there's limited parking. And what happens is, if somebody comes and all that parking's filled, somebody has to park a couple blocks away back in the neighborhood. And it really makes the homes difficult, we found, from a marketing standpoint. And also one of the things that we don't want to do is shift the burden of parking from on site to somewhere else in the neighborhood where somebody else has to deal with parking in front of their house, where they might want to park in front of their house at the same time. So it's a balance. It's something I think we should look at. But I think we're trying to balance that. And then just to talk about the stormwater, once again, coming up again in preliminary plan, we'll be looking at the recharge. There are significant stormwater requirements for Lower Merion Township and Narberth for recharge, where the site has no recharge. One of the conditions that we've had, and we've also put the applicant on notice, is that an outcome of this application should be the enhancement of that riparian area of Indian Creek. Both municipalities invested heavily in restoring Indian Creek. This is a keystone piece on that. So with the water quality and the plantings and best management practices, this is something we're really going to be expecting an A game from the applicant when they come back to see us with preliminary plan of how they're managing that stormwater going forward. I mean, they have to recharge it. They have to meet the rate control, but the water quality piece of it, I think, will be a real challenge. And with the large riparian buffer that's required by our code, trying to strike the right balance for that to make sure that that really is a highly functioning part of this watershed.
Well, unless anyone disagrees, I think it'd be helpful to bring the applicant forward. We may want to pursue any more exploration with their commentary.
That's fine.
I've enabled Christian, who's the project engineer, and Fred Fromhold, who's representing the property owner, to speak. Also, Bern Panzak, who is the landscape architect, as part of their team. If any of you want to have your cameras on, let me know and I can adjust. Also, Ed Sarnacki is the project architect.
Jillian, whatever your protocol is as far as cameras is concerned, happy to be present.
Welcome, Fred. Would you like to say any words to begin, or?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I will, and I will be brief because I think you would prefer to hear from Christian about the plan, and hopefully he will be able to address some of the questions that you have asked. But thank you for having this meeting and for having us all here. Chris, I think, will be the lead presenter. As Jillian had mentioned, Bern Panzak, our landscape architect, is also with us, as is Frank Tavani, our traffic engineer, and Ed Sarnacki, who is the architect, as well as perhaps the most important person on our team, Vince Falcone, who is our client and the equitable owner of this property. I want to join others who have expressed their appreciation for the cooperation that we have received from staff, from all of you at various times that we have spoken with you on this project. And I think that we have come a long way, and in a good way, from the original plan and the original concept for this site, which was the two larger buildings that had greater mass, as has been explained, more characteristic perhaps of what was opposite on Wynwood Road in Lower Merion Township in terms of those apartments and the feel that you get a little bit more mass and the architecture. I think as a result of meetings that we have had with you, with staff, and let me not leave out Maggie and the Montgomery County Planning Commission, all of that input has resulted in, I think, a materially changed plan, and one that is much more reflective of a Narberth feel, of buildings of the size, the massing, and I think ultimately, when we do finish our architecture, it will be, as Todd has expressed, reflective of the feel that you get when you go through Narberth. So that has been our goal. I think we are achieving that as a result of a lot of the good input, and I will say hard work by others on our team who have tackled these various issues, most particularly in the first instance, Christian, who has had to work with both codes and try to achieve the purposes of both codes and achieve mostly compliance with the Narberth code with regard to the majority of the site. But there has been some of that blending. We do have the frontage on Wynwood Road, where Lower Merion has established setbacks, but we think we've really worked out a nice compromise on those setbacks so that we have met the Lower Merion maximum with our porches, which are kind of a low mass component of the homes, and also we'll be meeting essentially the Narberth code setbacks, which has a 25-foot minimum front yard setback with the wall, the front wall of the home. So there has been a lot that has been achieved there. There has been mention, and I know Jim Cornwell has said, and I think others of you have echoed, the importance of the traffic and the circulation. And that's been something that we have worked on from day one, from the original concept, which was the 2 buildings. And we have those same challenges with our 3-building plan. And Frank Devani has had communications with PennDOT. Those are ongoing. We think that we will be able to provide that safe ingress and egress. And I think Frank will tell you certainly that the volumes of traffic that you would anticipate from this type of development, which is a residential development of relatively few units, it's going to be low impact. So we're continuing with those. So with that, I'd like Chris to give you just kind of a very, very quick overview of where we have come. And I attribute a lot of our progress here to all of you, the staffs, and the input that we have constantly been receiving over the last couple of months. And there's been a lot of meeting time that you have spent, that we have spent on this. So Chris, would you like to talk a little bit about the plan and zero in, if you can, on some of the issues that have been raised so far in this meeting?
Okay, thanks, Fred. And I echo, Fred's talking points about appreciating all the help from both staffs. If I could, I'm going to share my screen here and show you where we started. This is the plan we submitted in July with the 2 buildings, the 2 multifamily buildings. We then made a revision to address some LDC comments, changed the parking a little bit to avoid some sensitive features. We then had a Zoom call with both municipal staffs, and we came up with some options for the access. This option up here on the right still kept 1 single driveway, but it had just a right in and a right out. This option in the bottom left had the 1-way in and the 1-way out, which was ultimately the preference. And so we revised the plans to meet that 1-way. We still had the 2 separate buildings. We then had several other Zoom calls, and as staff and Fred mentioned, in order to get this to look a little more like Narberth and the buildings there, we went from the 2 buildings to 3, which have a lesser impact on the frontage. And so this was the first version of that plan. We then made another change to, really rotate those fan those buildings out a little bit to have a little better relationship to the street. And then ultimately, this was the plan that we submitted just a few weeks ago. And so we've had at least 6 meetings that had at least 1 member of Lower Merion and 1 member of Narberth on it. In some cases, there were more than 10 people on a call. So I guess from our perspective, we think we've really come a long way. I like how this plan looks. I appreciate others helping us get here. And so that was really the plan history I wanted to go over. I talked briefly about the circulation. What we now have is the egress driveway is only the right turnout. There's no left turnouts. The ingress driveway is a right turn in. At this point, the left turn ins are still shown. However, as discussed, once we go through the traffic study, work further with PennDOT and the municipal traffic engineer, will determine if those left-hand turns in are appropriate or not. And as some others had mentioned, some of the comments from the Township Engineer's letter were to install a mountable curb along the center line to prevent those left turns out. And we're agreeable to that condition, as well as all of the others. to talk a little bit more about the building width. Originally those buildings were 80 feet wide each for a total of 160. These buildings, this one in the center, lot 3, is 42 feet wide, which is really the maximum at Narberth, what they would prefer. Each building on the other side is also 42 feet in the front. It does have a step back and then a projection out to the side with another 10 feet. My understanding with Narberth is once you're 6 feet back, you can have that projection. So I think even though we don't have to meet the Narberth frontages, I believe we do. Even if you count those extra, well, without the 10 feet, we have a total, building width of 126 feet compared to the 160. And even if you count those other 10, it gets us to 146. In terms of the overall square footage of the buildings, the original were 4777 each, which times 2 gets you to about 9,500. And the total of these 3 buildings is a little under 8,000 square feet. I would like to quickly go over the floodplain, and I don't know if at some point it might be good for either Mr. Johnson or Mr. Mastronardo to help with that. I know there's many concerns about the floodplain and how this development affects it. So I'd like to start with, there's some dashed lines on this plan. It's a dash and then 2 dots. And so this line that I'm following with my mouse here is the FEMA line. And actually it runs out on this right-hand side of the page as well. And so FEMA has different designations for their floodplains. They have a zone AE where it's a studied stream and there are elevations associated with each point or cross section. And if that's the case, then you can just show that floodplain line at the correct location on the plan. In this case, it's called zone A, meaning it was not studied. And so someone made an estimate to where that line should be, either based on historical data or topography, floodplain soils, or just whatever available information there was. In that case, you need to go by the FEMA and municipal requirements to calculate the floodplain to find out really where is that line. Is it better or worse than the estimate? And so this blue line is where we calculated it to be. You can see in the back by this part of the parking, it actually gets a little closer to the channel. And at this location over here by the lot 2 building, it actually gets a little further from the estimated line. We submitted this calculation with the original tentative sketch plans in early July, and we've revised several times per the municipal engineer's comments. And I believe we're now at a point where we're in agreement on this is where the calculated line should be. Another change we've made throughout this process is the original buildings had no porches. So we've added porches. The original buildings were a little closer to the street. We've pushed the buildings back. As I said, we fanned them out a little bit. And with the condition number 2, we will be pushing those buildings back even further. So I think there's been a lot of improvement in the frontage and view of those buildings from the street. A couple other, issues that we've been working through and are either something we need to go over or are going over now or will be addressed further in preliminary plan are the stream maintenance. I know there was a concern with the property line going down the center of the channel and who would maintain that channel. During the preliminary plan stage, we will provide documentation to show who will maintain it. Our intention is that lots 2, 3, and 4 will be responsible for the entire maintenance. I think that was, or the HOA that's created for them. I think that was part of the suggestion, is that it be one entity instead of several that might fight against each other. Another one of the concerns is the lot line waiver. We need a waiver from the Narberth code. The code asks for the property line to be perpendicular to the street wherever practical and straight for the entire length. And so, it is actually perpendicular to the street because that's how the channel crosses Elmwood Avenue. However, when you follow the center line of the channel as you go back, it meanders back and forth. From my perspective, that is a practical way to draw a property line. I think, you know, in history, that's, you'd use physical boundaries to know where your property begins and someone else, where yours ends and someone else's begins. That being said, we've gone over this with the municipal staffs. We have shown this alternative sketch that shows two potential solutions that would not require a waiver. This thick black line is a line that's perpendicular to Wynwood Road. This red line is perpendicular to Elmwood Avenue. And I believe either one of those would meet the code without a waiver, but I don't think that's the practical way to draw this line. Either way, what you would end up with is some type of sliver of land that one property owns on the other side of the street or other side of the channel that they can't get to. Certainly if, you know, we could have drawn this line perpendicular to the channel, that would be different. That's something that I have seen, you know, throughout municipalities. And so I just wanted to show that, to show we have, you know, considered the alternatives. And then I think lastly was really the riparian buffer plantings. So the code requires basically there's different levels of riparian buffer widths depending on the size of the property. And so, you know, for this property, you're required a 10-foot minimum riparian buffer from the top of bank, and that's required on both sides of the channel. So at the preliminary plan stage, we'll show the required plantings for that area. But, you know, knowing that's a concern, staff presented a condition that we would work with the Lower Merion Conservancy and also the Lower Merion EAC, Environmental Advisory Council. And so we will continue to work with them. I believe we will likely be providing some, you know, additional plantings outside of the 10-foot required minimum. However, you know, I think this area, I'm not sure it wants to be entirely planted. I think it wants to be used for a couple different purposes. I think there's some areas where the riparian buffer planting is appropriate. I think there's some areas up at the top where maybe some buffer plantings are appropriate. And I think there's some other areas that are appropriate to be used for the residences to be able to walk down and get to the channel and, you know, enjoy it. I know when my kids go to my mom's house, they have a channel in their neighborhood, and that's one of the things they want to go down there and do is, you know, create some kind of aluminum foil boats or something to put down there and see how they go and race. So I think those are the issues I really wanted to cover. You know, we have several review letters on this project. We have one from the Lower Merion Township Engineer, one from the Narberth Township Engineer, a joint letter from the Montgomery County Planning Commission, a letter from the Narberth Zoning Officer. In Lower Merion Township, we wouldn't typically go over those. Instead, you know, we were agreeing to a condition that basically says we will comply unless something is contradictory to the conditions. In Narberth, we typically would go over comments. However, I'm hopeful that in this case, since they are referenced in the conditions of approval, that maybe doesn't make sense to do that. I'll say that I haven't found a condition or a comment that I thought was problematic. You know, there's a few that I think require a little more back and forth, but I'd say 90% really just are things that are asked for at the preliminary plan stage. So I hope that I ran through that quickly.
Chris, could I ask you to comment just on a couple of things?
Yes.
I know there was a question with regard to the amount of impervious surface on this site in this development. And part of that concern relates to the amount of parking. And I know there have been discussions back and forth, a little bit of a different approach on the off-street parking between Lower Merion and Narberth, Lower Merion requiring more. And I guess in this particular case, because there are no real good, we'll call it on-street parking opportunities that are convenient, very convenient to the site, erring on the side of having a little bit more parking rather than a little bit less parking is somewhere where we thought it was sensible to come out. But having said that, we have how many surface parking spaces and how many parking spaces that are actually found within the building footprint itself, what I'll call covered or garage spaces, which has effectively reduced the number of surface parking spaces that had originally been shown on the plan that was first submitted.
Right, so there are 8 garage parking spaces that would be that I'll say are zoning compliant, and there are 14 surface spaces that are compliant for a total of 22. We do have 4 additional garage spaces, which I call tandem. Basically, this parking space 8A and 8B, and so in order to get in and out of 8B, the person in 8A would have to move their car. And so we're not counting those 4 spaces towards the provided parking. However, they are in there so that, a unit owner that owns both of those, they would be assigned spaces. So it would be 2 parking spaces for a specific unit. So, the unit owners could coordinate the same way that maybe someone on this call does with other people that live in their household.
Right. So is it fair to say that the surface parking has been reduced from that shown on the plan originally filed?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And how do these numbers, I think Jillian said the pervious surface allowances, Lower Merion and Narberth were what, 50% and 60%?
Right, so the Lower Merion, and maybe I should take a little step back before I answer that, Fred. When we approached this, we really approached it as, using the municipal boundary, and everything on the Wynwood Avenue side or Wynwood Road side of the municipal boundary is in Lower Merion. And so we use that to meet the Lower Merion standards. Everything on the Narberth side, we went to work towards the Narberth standards. And so for impervious coverage, on the Lower Merion side, the requirement is no more than 50%, and on the Narberth side, it's no more than 60%. So we're meeting the 50% on Lower Merion and 60% on Narberth, which then ultimately makes the overall work if you did a blended calculation.
Right. And do you happen to know off the top of your head the percentage of coverage in Narberth?
They vary, but it is correct. One of the comments, let me see if I could quickly open actually, it's right here. So for lot 2, the proposed percentage in Narberth is 17%. For lot 3, the proposed is 60%. And for lot 4, the proposed is 46%. And so it's really this lot 3, which is in the center. We have shared parking, we have shared, a dumpster, shared access, everything here. There'll be shared stormwater management, shared landscaping. This will all be shared in an attempt to kind of reduce that. And so as a result, this lot 3 is really taking the hit, having the most parking in the center here to make it most accessible to either sides.
Okay, and the final thing I'm going to ask you to comment on, and it may be that Frank Tavani would care to chime in at this point, although we have some way to go with PennDOT. But that question had been brought up about the aisle, the right turn lane as you go west and approach the tunnel in front of our site, and whether traffic exiting our property is likely to be problematic in any way with regard to the flow of traffic. Do you have a comment on that? And I'll ask Frank to comment on that as well.
Well, Frank's probably more or better to answer that question. From my perspective, I think this is no different than entering any other 2-lane or I guess a 4-lane road, 2-lane going in one direction. You would pull up to the stop sign at the end of the driveway. You would wait for your gap in the cars that are approaching, which may happen by, a number of cars driving by, and then there's an available a time that is available for you to pull out, and you may choose to pull into the turn lane, or you may choose to pull into the left-hand through lane. And the same way that you would on any road where you're exiting and there's 2 lanes. I'd say, the other alternative with the light right here is, if there is a queue at that light, what I, see as I drive throughout the day is oftentimes someone will see you waiting to go out, and they would stop maybe right in front of lot 3 and give you the room to pull out, when it's your turn. So I don't view that as a major problem. I think this is improved from where it started, and I, from my perspective, I'll defer the rest to Frank.
Frank, would you like to jump in here?
I sure would. And Chris Yan is doing a great job at not only being a civil engineer, but he could probably also take my job at some point. He summarized that very well. The site is located on the outside of a curve, which affords very good lines of sight to motorists who are attempting to leave. And as Chris mentioned, I imagine what would happen is, for the people who are leaving the site, they'll simply look over their left shoulder, wait until there's an acceptable gap, not only in the lane closest to them, but also in the through lane, and then pull out when it's appropriate. I did perform traffic counts at this location earlier this year. I've also reviewed some other historic traffic counts in the area. And I should probably mention, since it's public information, I happen to live less than a mile away from this site, so I transverse this property frequently. The westbound right turn movement has a maximum of about 170 vehicles per hour during either existing weekday peak hour. That translates to about 2 or 3 vehicles per minute. That means that there's not really a long queue that forms frequently in this right turn lane. And I should also mention, as I'm sure everyone knows, the signal immediately to the west operates under 3 distinct phases. The first phase is when the traffic is going in both directions on Wynwood Road, at which point that right turn lane is free flowing. The next phase is when the traffic leaving the tunnel has a green ball and proceeds, either making a left or a right. And during that movement, which is sort of an overlap for the westbound right, the westbound right continues to flow freely because the southbound movement is sort of running cover for it. So the traffic is still flowing freely, and there's still no queue forming in that right turn lane. The only time that there is a queue that does form in that right turn lane is during the next phase, the last phase, which is the eastbound advance. As everyone probably knows, there's an eastbound left turn only lane at this intersection. And the signal is also programmed to provide a left turn advance phase when the opposing westbound traffic stops. So it's just during that 1/3 of the traffic cycle that the traffic actually stops in that lane. So there's really never a queue that's going to back up and block the exit driveway. And in the rare event that it will happen, as Chris mentions, the outbound motorist will probably take note of that and simply wait until the traffic starts moving before it exits. And I should also emphasize, as you heard from others earlier, that the applicant has never sought to have an outbound left turn at this location, just because it is a slightly busier street than others, and there is 3 lanes. And it's just simply not necessary. We are still investigating whether or not a left turn in is appropriate. There is an existing eastbound shoulder that basically gets the full width right in the vicinity of the entering lane for the site. So we think that's a possibility that in the rare event an entering left turn may stop briefly to yield to opposing westbound through traffic, another eastbound motorist can simply bypass that stopped left turning motorist by using the shoulder and get where they need to go. Most importantly, when you're talking about 12 attached housing units, as we are, and you look at the ITE, or Institute of Transportation Engineers, standard trip generation rates, which all traffic engineers rely upon, this combined site will result in about 6 peak hour trips, either in the morning or the afternoon. Now, of course, there will be traffic at other times, the hours preceding and following the peak hours, the middle of the day, whatever. but all those times the traffic flow will be less. During the peak, it's going to be about 6 total trips. In the morning, the majority will be leaving, so you're talking 4 or 5 trips over an hour. In the afternoon, the majority will be entering. So once again, you're talking about 4 or 5 trips per hour. In the event that the left turn lane for entering traffic is not provided, that traffic will simply reassign itself. It's probably coming from Lancaster Avenue. Any eastbound traffic that's leaving Lancaster Avenue and wanting to get to the site could take a multitude of different paths. Some might involve Yerkes Road, some might involve Cedar Grove, Clover Hill. But the net effect is it's only going to be resulting in maybe 1 or 2 additional trips on any one of these roads, which the average motorist or resident won't even notice because it's such a small number. So we do have work to do, and I was comforted at the beginning of the evening when Mr. Leswing pointed out that we're a tentative sketch, and this is traffic, and it usually gets focused upon later, and we will continue to focus upon it and make sure that it works as efficiently as it possibly can.
Thank you very much. I think I allowed more time to pass there than we normally would, but I appreciate that the number of the questions raised by the board members previously were addressed in those answers. Are there any further questions for the applicant from board members? I'm sure there are, but we'll move to public comment after that.
Commissioner France, I just wanted to just double check with the applicant. We have, because this is a very involved application, and there are numerous community entities. Has the applicant met with the Shortridge Civic Association yet? I see that, I know this has been very involved with Narberth, and there's been a lot of outreach to Narberth with this, because I'm not seeing many people here from Shortridge this evening. I just wanted to follow up with the applicant on that.
Chris, yeah, I'm unmuted. There had been outreach to Shortridge, and we were kind of off again, on again, and I'll ask Vince to comment very briefly on the most recent discussion with them. But one of our concerns here is that our target has been moving fast, and we didn't want to start meeting with Shortridge until we kind of knew where we were in terms of this plan. I mean, we had 2 units, and then we had different driveway systems. We've been working very fast on this, and a lot has changed and been, we believe, and I hope staff would agree, has been improved here as a result of this process, to the point where we have only recently been in a position where we could confidently say to anyone with whom we would meet that, hey, this is our plan. So Vince, can you just unmute and let us know what the last communication was with Shortridge?
You're exactly right, Fred. That's with everything moving so quickly, I did try to keep them up to date. At the times that we had to submit the plans to the township, I followed them up with them quickly after, but apparently the nights that they meet, I believe it's the 3rd Monday of the month, which was after the time that we submitted the plans to the township. So I think they were just going to forward them to the members for them to look at instead of having an official meeting, if that makes sense.
So there has been that effort there, but our train has been moving fast, we think, in a good direction.
Right.
Are we on comments or questions, Scott?
Questions. And I'll offer one. Just curious, on lot 2, the unit most south fronting Wynwood, is there any option or exploration of access from the parking area and back? As shown, I know you have a retaining wall. The only way really to get to that unit is to go out to the street and then around to the front door. Does the applicant have any alternative, or have they considered how that unit functions?
Chris? Where are you?
Yes. If you don't mind, I'm going to share a screen that I understand some people didn't see, and that's probably my fault. So if I can answer your second in a Scott, Mr. France. This is the black line I was talking about, perpendicular to Wynwood Road, and the red line perpendicular to Elmwood. But I think your question related to Lot 2 and their access. So each of these buildings will have one entrance in the front. That's a requirement of Narberth Code, which I'd argue doesn't apply, but we are trying to do the best we can to kind of meet both codes wherever we can. And so we will have one entrance into this building, and from that entrance, you'll be able to get to all 4 units. In the back, in the garage, there'll be a garage door along the back where you can get to the 4 units as well. I think that, I need to adjust this retaining wall to show enough room to get into the rear of Lot 2 would be the answer to your question.
Yeah, that was my concern.
Scott, let me, I guess, I was thinking about it a little bit more. I do have a question, but let me frame it with a comment as well. And that really has to do with the Shortridge Civic Association. I don't find that we're moving fast to be a great excuse for not engaging with a civic association. I think Shortridge, as you could probably tell from my earlier comment about traffic and studying the Shortridge intersection, certainly has an interest and should be heard. And my question is, would the applicant consider tabling the application for a month so you can meet with the Shortridge Civic Association?
Mr. Rosenbaum, I can certainly try to figure out how we can have that discussion somewhat privately and provide you an answer. I think probably all the surrounding areas, including Shortridge, including the Narberth community, are in a position where they are interested in anything that happens in their vicinity, and this is in their vicinity. We will certainly be talking to Shortridge. We can certainly talk to any Narberth constituencies that are interested in this. We will do that. And I do understand your question is more specific than that is, and that is whether we would do that before we ask for recommendations from the planning commissions. And I will try to figure out how we have that discussion among ourselves, and I can provide you an answer, because I don't have the authority on my own to agree to that.
I understand that. I mean, I guess in principle, I generally think that developers should meet with civic associations before they present a tentative sketch. And given the fact that you've changed the plan significantly, albeit, and I think, for the better, some people in Shortridge may feel like they weren't given an adequate opportunity. But I'll save my comments for comments later.
Yeah, they could say also they'd prefer it to look like the buildings across the street in Lower Merion Township, which would cause us some consternation if they were to conclude that. But
I understand your conundrum.
I did send the plans to the Shortridge Association, and since they understood that the nights that their meetings were not available at that time, that he would forward them to the association. He said he gets good feedback from comments from them by sending them out. I spoke to Brian Hirsch, sent them out, and I had sent him the previous plans as well. I did not hear back from him as far as any comments or anything, but I assumed he followed through and sent them to, the rightful people that he should have sent them out to. I just want to make sure you're aware that we didn't, forget about them. They were forwarded these latest plans. They have them. And it was him that had told me that because of the timing, he would just forward them to the, appropriate people and that he could get comments that way.
I'm not going to respond, but I understand the answer. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant before we move to public comment?
I have a question, if I may. This question, so first of all, Chris, thank you for kind of walking us through the evolution of the project. I think it was really useful to see the feedback you got and how you incorporated it. One of the significant changes from the 2-building approach to the 3-building approach is that the number of units increased from 10 to 12. And so I'm wondering if you could address that and explain why, if 10 units were appropriate in the previous scheme, 10 bigger units actually, why 12 small units are necessary now, and particularly because lot 4, if you were to consider the whole lot to be in Narberth, it does exceed the number, it would exceed the number of units that would be permitted, and it would exceed the building coverage slightly as well. So I'm wondering why 4 small units as opposed to, say, 2 of the larger units you proposed in your first scheme might not be just as acceptable on lot 4.
So thanks. So, it's a difficult project where I have on each lot, I need to show that we're complying with the Lower Merion regulations and the Narberth regulations. And then in addition, all of the other, asks we've had along the way. Can you do this? Can you push the buildings back? Can you add porches? Can you rotate the buildings apart? Can you reduce the width? And so with all those things, a big change that happened from that, which you mentioned, from the original plan to this plan, was a big reduction in the square footage. And so, a lot of that has to do with the use of each unit. And then, besides that, in terms of the codes, the Narberth code has a multifamily building, which has, up to 5 units in it. Whereas in Lower Merion, they have a small multifamily, which is 3 to 6. That requires a 100-foot lot width. So on that smaller, or on the sketch plan with 2 buildings, we met that 100-foot lot width on either side. Whereas on the revised layout with the 3 lots, now we don't have as much lot width. The quad building actually only requires 60 feet instead of the 100. So it was a combination of, a reduced amount of square footage and the, getting all of the requirements to work.
I think I'm sorry, just I'm sort of trying to compare with the data I see here. This is lot 4 we're talking about. You said you have 100-foot minimum lot width for a smaller building. Is that right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a 99.1-foot lot width.
You're right.
That's like de minimis. So you could actually have a smaller building there, and I'm sure for 9/10 of a foot that could be. So I don't know that that's a reason conforming with the building or lot width.
I mean, that's a tough one. Certainly we could, have no units on the site or 1 unit. And so it's it's a game between meeting the requirements and getting something that works for, all the participants involved. I see that Mr. Spear has his hand raised.
Yeah, seems like a good time to ask this question, but on lot 3, don't see that you have enough lot width to support a 42-foot frontage build out. Maybe I'm wrong on that. It's at least close. I'm wondering what the lot frontage on lot 3 is.
So I'll look that up. But
Yeah.
while I do it, I'll mention, kind of what I did before, where we're trying to meet both the Lower Merion and Narberth, and that portion of it is in Lower Merion. And so that's why, on the old set of plans that had 80-foot wide buildings, they met the code. And so we've changed the plan to, reduce the square footage and get a layout that everyone likes, and still meets the code sections. So I'll look to see if we have that on the
Thanks.
plan.
So I'm wondering if someone could clarify, would Lower Merion permit 2 or 3 units on that lot 4 as opposed to 4 units? And if so, would that cause code compliance problems? I mean, I guess I'm wondering, is this really a code issue, or is it just sort of an economics issue?
So I can respond to that, Todd. It does change the use. It would go from a quad to a small multifamily, which is permitted, but there would likely be some change in some of the standards. And I can't on the fly speak to those, but my understanding in MDR2 is that different building types have different standards.
And Todd, if I can just chime in, I think in fairness, it's both. I think it's code, but there have been a lot of things that have happened to the project, all good, but at a cost. And in order for the project to be viable economically, we have smaller units. There are a lot of things that are affecting the total proceeds side, and I think construction cost by the time we're all said and done probably be a tad, if not more, than were originally anticipated in order to accomplish those design preferences, which I think we don't disagree one bit that they're nice, they're good, they're Narberth, and but economics certainly does factor into it as well.
Okay, and I did do that calculation. So for lot 3, we have a 69-foot lot width times the maximum 65% would get us to 44.85 feet.
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying thanks for that. Thanks for looking that up.
Any further questions?
No.
All right, let's move to public comment. And this was where Jillian will, I guess we're accepting public comment from either Narberth or Lower Merion, but we definitely would help for people to identify themselves both by their municipality and their address as well.
Scott, we also have gotten some questions. I've been able to answer some of them on the fly, but there are some questions. Recently, we got 3 on transportation, so I think they would fall under the category of public comment. How would you like to handle that? Do you want me to read them aloud, and we can have the applicant's team respond to them, or?
Well, I'm okay with. I would prefer if you haven't answered them already, and I see that you have addressed some, and if you feel it needs an applicant comment, then go ahead. I don't want to get bogged down. Our process normally doesn't use the Q&A feature. And we ask people to make their comment, and it's more of a statement than a question and answer period. So I'm happy if there's an outstanding question that is worth answering that you think. Let's go ahead and address that, and otherwise we'll open the floor for public comment.
Sure. So how about we open the floor for public comment? I will look through the questions and see if there's something specifically that needs to be answered by traffic.
Sounds good.
So if you have a question or you want to make a comment, please raised your hand. Okay, so the first person is Alexandra Ting.
Okay. I can't see myself. I guess you can see me, right? Okay. Well, I have a couple of questions and comments. One is, it sounds to me like you're trying to get, or the owner, which I understand, and developer are trying to get the most they can out of this property. However, remember that the code was changed to allow up to 5 family dwellings in an area that only had singles and twins up to that point. And to push it even farther, I think you'll have a lot of pushback from the residents, including myself, but I assure you a lot more. So if you're trying to meet both Lower Merion and Narberth requirements for the square footage of the lot and also the frontage of the lot that's required to have a certain number of units on that property, I think it would be minimal to expect you to honor Narberth's code, because most of the property is in Narberth, and not push it any further, because there's going to be a lot of pushback. And those buildings are very large. They're already much larger than the large house that's already on the property. So that is one thing that I'm concerned about. The other thing is I hope you will maximize the natural green space as much as possible and minimize the parking spaces as much as you can. I realize maybe you'd want more than one parking space, which I think is sensible for each unit. But if you can reduce the number of surface parking, I think that would be really helpful, and bring it a little bit farther away from the stream. Maybe put semi-permeable surface on the parking areas. I don't know if that's possible, but I think the best way to drain the stream, the flooding, is to have natural land on either side of the stream and not try to channel it. Every time this has happened, there's been a problem. We've had a recent new drainage system break over in one heavy rain recently north of Narberth Park, and we had the new area of the sewer repair on East Wynwood Road break in the recent rain and flood. So, and that was supposed to be a 100-year storm. So I think there are a lot of problems that are just pending. And I know one of my neighbors, who's I think in the meeting here, lives right downstream from this development, and that area of that stream floods all the time. Every time you enclose the sides of the stream with stone walls, you're pushing water downstream, and then the next area floods more and more and more. And Shortridge cannot absorb all that. And the culvert that was just repaired under the street, it might be even too small now, so I think we need to be really, really careful of that. And I have one suggestion about the orientation of the houses and the porches, and this may be a design thing that might be considered later, but if there's one that's on the corner, I forget which lot number that is, maybe it's lot 2, but it's on the corner of Elmwood and Wynwood, and so one side faces Narberth, and I would like you to consider the fact that really nobody really wants to be that close to East Wynwood Road. It's very noisy, and I see you have nice buffer trees there, but does anyone really want to sit on a porch on East Wynwood Road? Why don't you move the porch over to the Narberth side of the building, and so people can sit out on the side and have that the facade, or just have the porch there and have an entrance there. So maybe you could turn the whole building or just put the porch there. I don't really know, but I would consider orienting at least the 2 outer buildings towards the sides, not towards Wynwood Road. And that way you don't really have to have much of a setback. You can have less of a setback, a lot of greenery shielding from the road, and then have the entrance on the side. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Jillian, could I just understand the address of Ms. Ting?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say that.
No,
My address is 117 Woodside Avenue in Narberth.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Next up, and I guess I would just ask that if people are writing questions right now, if you could just verbally ask the questions. It's kind of a little bit much juggling both. And I'm not able to tell if what was said answered your question. So I think it might be better to ask it in person. Next up would be Maureen McGeehan.
I think I'm unmuted, right?
Yes.
Hi, so I'm Maureen McGeehan. I'm the director of the Lower Merion Conservancy. The Conservancy is located at 1301 Rose Glen Road in Rolling Hill Park in Gladwin. The Conservancy is a member-supported nonprofit organization that protects open space, preserves historic architecture, and conserves the local watershed. Thank you for the chance to speak tonight. We do have a few comments followed by a few questions about the plan, which I can place in the chat or the Q&A if that's better. So just stop me if I'm going on too long. But Narberth has very limited open space. Developing 3 Elmwood Avenue would eliminate one of the last contiguous open spaces in the borough. The presence of East Branch of Indian Creek makes this lot especially valuable for wildlife and for capturing and filtering stormwater before it enters the stream. The East Branch of Indian Creek eventually connects with the Delaware River, which is a drinking water source even in its lower reaches. Upstream developments have a negative impact on these sources. So all efforts to mitigate upstream runoff are important, and the Conservancy believes it's imperative to establish these efforts early on in the process. The proposed tree removal that the plan calls for will be especially detrimental. New plantings take years to contribute the same benefits that established plants do from the mature habitat that they provide to the stormwater absorption and air temperature regulation. Building up to the floodplain line does not account for rising precipitation rates. Placing the buildings on Lot 2 and portions of the parking lot so close to the line provides no flexibility for the future. Expansion of the floodplain, which will eventually happen in the coming years, could put the property at risk for more potential harm to wildlife and the watershed. Uncontrolled stormwater from buildings and pavements in Lower Merion and Narberth directly contribute to the massive flooding issues of our downstream neighbors. This past storm that we experienced in August was devastating. It was rough on Narberth and areas of Lower Merion, but it was especially difficult for Darby and Eastwick residents who had to flee their homes, and in some cases are still not in their homes. But we also recognize that smaller, more common storms are also making big impacts. So this development will make Narberth's pollutant reduction requirements steeper and sediment reduction harder. It will make life more difficult for our downstream neighbors and increase pressure on a system that is already stressed. We are pleased to see the required tree additions included in the latest plan. Their canopies will grow and they'll help to reduce the amount of rainfall landing on the paved surfaces. So that was nice to see. But given the sensitivity of this area, we know there's more that can be done to help mitigate flooding and protect our shared natural resources. A few things we'd like the applicant to consider is for the floodplain to be maintained as a no-mow zone. Planting floodplain trees in a grid pattern with trees spaced 8 to 10 feet apart can make it easier to create a mowed path to the stream. And it sounds like from Chris's report that stream access for residents is indeed important. So that can be done with this grid pattern of trees. We ask that the open area behind the dumpster pad be planted with trees to reestablish a woodland area on the property. And we also ask for a berm to be created downhill of the level spreader. So the berm would help slow overflow coming from the spreader, allowing more water to be absorbed into the ground, which will help to filter out sediment and other pollutants before reaching the stream. And then a couple of questions we had about the plan. One is general note 3 on page 2. The plan states that the majority of the proposed development will be collected, or the majority of the stormwater from the development will be collected and conveyed to an underground stormwater system. It says that the rainwater would be over controlled to compensate for areas where it's under controlled. So we just want to understand what you mean by over controlled. How do you define that? And how large of a storm can this sort of over controlling system, how large of a storm can it handle in inches? And will any of it filter out pollutants from the building and parking lot runoff? And the last question we had has to do with this same feature. Because of its very close proximity to the floodplain, and it's below the surface, it's important to ensure that that system does not encounter groundwater or potentially lose any of its management capacity. And we asked earlier, it still might be a little too soon for this question, but has a detailed geotechnical evaluation been done to evaluate the depth of the groundwater? Because that evaluation obviously should be done prior to construction. And is there a plan for monitoring this depth post-construction? So those are our questions for now. And thank you so much for letting us ask them.
So thank you, Maureen. Those were some really great questions. I would ask if you have any of that written down, if you could forward that to staff. I think that's a really great list of concerns, questions. I think that the applicant's engineer and the township engineer may be the best to, and the borough's engineer as well may be the best to respond to some of these stormwater and floodplain questions.
I can start if you'd like, or yeah, I see Mr. Johnson shaking his head. So yeah, the note on the plan is a typical note that I put on tentative sketch plans in Lower Merion, where, you know, at the tentative sketch, well, I guess in the order of a plan, when it's designed, we first kind of do the layout, then we do the grading, then we do the stormwater management, just in terms of those things. And so, you know, for tentative sketch, it's really a focus on layout. It's not a focus on the stormwater yet. However, it does need to be considered. So we did on the plan show some spot elevations for a scheme for grading. And then we do show, I believe, 2 inlets for where we believe water would be directed. And we show a red line for a potential drainage area. Now, in the preliminary plan stage, we need to fully evaluate all of that. But we put the note on there that, you know, we're going to collect what we can, basically all roof area and the majority of the parking, but there's inevitably, you know, little parts of paving or a walkway out front or something that is a little harder to collect. And so we say that we over-design the collected part basically by holding that water back a little longer, knowing that the water that's not collected is going a little faster. And so in the design, there will be two main parts, and that's controlled and uncontrolled. And they both go together then for the final rates and final volumes. We have not done infiltration testing yet, but that's something else will be required and needed to complete the stormwater design.
I would just add that, you know, with the infiltration testing and any soil testing, the ordinance is pretty clear about identification of the limiting zones, whether it be bedrock or groundwater, and maintaining the proper separation from both. And they would be required to do that as well.
The Narberth and Lower Merion stormwater codes follow the same requirements. They're very much compatible with each other and would be fully reviewed as part of their stormwater management design during the preliminary plan phase.
Okay, does anyone have anything else to add or? Okay, our next comment is from John Cannon. And
John Cannon at 107 Kenilworth Road. I think I forget who was mentioning it, but they were talking about the Narberth feel. And I think, if anyone talks about the Narberth feel, they talk about walkability. And I look at this plan and frankly, I'm scared to death. I mean, you refer to this intersection as kind of like, well, it's just your typical intersection, but it's not perpendicular. And North Wynwood Road goes through a very narrow tunnel with a very, very narrow sidewalk. When you see those two driveways, those are basically obstacles to pedestrian and bike traffic. And I'm kind of a planner's dream. I mean, I bike to work, and I walk everywhere. I walk up to Wynwood, and this is one of the few safe crossing sections that we have with a light, and we just got that. And now we have basically two driveways that we have to get there. And I think that whenever you put obstacles up for pedestrian traffic and bicycle traffic, people stop using those. So people are just going to stop using this area, or worse yet, cross farther down Wynwood Road, which frankly is not safe. So what I would do is I would encourage the developer to do more, or at least something to address pedestrian traffic. I think one thing they could definitely do, you're talking a lot about easements and easements, for the township, for the borough, and also, access for the folks down to the stream. Why not have an easement across the property for pedestrians as well? I mean, I think that's something that Christian would really want to sink his teeth into. We have it with the Thomas Wynn apartments, and if we're going to create a pedestrian hazard here and a bicycle hazard here, then maybe we should have some means to protect, against any possible injuries. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Good luck, guys.
thank you, John. Next is Ken Kravinsky, and then.
And I should interrupt. Please identify again where your municipality come from. We do have a 3-minute limit on public comment, although most of our public has been very respectful of that. So thank you.
I am getting a notification that Ken is using an old version of Zoom, so we can't allow him to talk, but we can promote him to panelist. So I am going to do that. Ken, you also have a few questions located in the Q&A. If you are able to add, if they have not been answered, please ask them again. But
great, I think they were answered. Thank you. I'm at 1 Woodside Avenue in Narberth, and we are literally the house that's probably 2 down on the creek. The channel runs through our property. First, thank you. There's obviously been a lot of improvements made on these plans, so we appreciate that. I have a couple of just concerns. One is the traffic pattern. So we lived through when Wynwood Road was shut, and we know that with no left turn out of there, the group that is leaving is going to try to do strange turns around the neighborhoods. And while I think they said 12 cars, 6 peak, my experience has been when that road is shut down, that's going to put more traffic through our neighborhood. So that's just a concern that is I would love everyone to think through is how do you really expect people to get around when someone can't make a left out of the parking lot or can't make a left in if that ends up happening? And also I have a concern with the floodplain because I could say my property floods regularly and the creek overflows with some regularity when it's a big storm. And we are very concerned with how that is managed so that it doesn't add water to the channel more than it currently is, because that'll be not nice, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Next up is Stephen Vargo.
Hi, thanks. I am another South Sider. I live at 20 Woodside Avenue, and Ken just addressed my primary concern about traffic coming from the Lancaster Avenue direction towards City Avenue. Woodside Avenue is the first through street that a car can make a left, so I would anticipate to get into 3 Elmwood, into the new property, a car will make a left on Woodside, right on Maple, right on Chestnut, and right on East Wynwood, increasing the traffic on our street. So I would hope that the Narberth Planning Commission would advocate on our behalf. The second comment I had was about overflow parking. Again, because Woodside Avenue is the first through street, any overflow traffic from the new property would likely wind up on ours, and many houses on our street do not have driveways and garages. So another aspect of this that I would hope the Narberth Planning Commission takes into account. I don't know if that is neighborhood parking permits or what, but I will just leave that up to you all. Thanks very much. And that was my question in the Q&A section.
Great, thank you very much. Noreen Walsh is next.
Hi, my name is Noreen Walsh. I live at 101 Woodside Avenue, and I want to second what Mr. Vargo just had to say. Woodside already bears a lot of traffic. People are constantly coming in and out of South Narberth on Woodside Avenue, and we can't handle anymore. Even at the intersection with Woodside and Wynwood, I mean, cars are always having to try to maneuver around each other because there's too much traffic coming in and going out there. And I just don't even understand how this development is being proposed. We are supposed to be a single family home, primarily at least single family home area in Narberth. That was the whole idea from the very beginning. That was what 3B was designed to be. We advocated very hard for the limitation to 3 units per dwelling. That was accepted by the Planning Commission, and then it went to our council and somehow ended up at 5 again. But this is ridiculous how many units are being put in here. Why isn't any consideration being made to at least making these homes rather than these, multi-family units with all this parking? And where's the parking going to be by? Is this parking going to be by the homes already on Elmwood? And how do those people feel about that? And we are a community that is being, like, every single open space in Narberth is being taken up. It's horrible. It's becoming, and in fact, the whole main line is becoming a place you don't even want to live anymore because there's no open patches of land. I don't know what the planning commissions of Lower Merion and Narberth are thinking, but somebody's got to put a stop to some of this. And I would really encourage you to take a stand. You represent our communities. So, start advocating for residents and not just for developers, please. And please pay attention to the increased traffic, just as Mr. Vargo spoke to. We shouldn't bear the brunt of that. So I really hope you take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Noreen. Next up, we have Walter McDonough. Walter, can you unmute yourself?
Okay.
Hi, this is Rosemary McDonough. I'm talking on Walter's laptop, and I'm at 3 Elmwood Ave. I'm sorry, I'm at 9 Elmwood Avenue. I feel like I'm at 3. I'm 2 doors down from the project, and I just want to support completely all the previous comments made by my good neighbors on Elmwood and Woodside. I think that we really need to look much more closely at traffic. Contrary to what the traffic gentleman said, I have sat in traffic on a Sunday morning in the middle of the pandemic in July behind 6 cars at that stoplight on more than one occasion. And I'm just wondering if there's no way you can stop this altogether, why can't we just consider maybe 2 nice single-family homes that would look like my house number 9 and the ones next to it that are fairly recent. They're a good size. I'm seeing homes 3,000 square feet in Narberth selling for $1.3 million, $1.4 million. I think you could put just 2 houses in there, minimize the traffic greatly and the danger. The developer and everybody involved would make all their money, and we wouldn't have, as my neighbor Maureen just said, this crazy growth sort of on steroids here. So I just throw that out as a consideration. Just because the zoning says we can do it doesn't mean we should. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me just go through and see. There is a question from David B. in the Q&A. He asked, would this project have been possible before the passing of the form-based code in Narberth, in addition to the change in parking overlay? Is there someone from Narberth that would like to answer that?
Good evening, everybody. I am the current zoning officer for Narberth. However, I came in just under a year after the new code, so I believe I'll defer probably to Todd, who may know more about that than I do.
Okay. Sure. So first of all, as a matter of information, I really can't say. We don't normally do that kind of analysis of whether a project that's being approved now could have been approved under one code or another. I mean, a previous code. The code we have is the code we have, and I think this particular aspect of our code was highly thought out, and I think, as several speakers said, it was one of the last things that really was resolved at council, and council resolved it the way they did, and that is the borough's policy. I'm not sure what the parking overlay question is about. When we approved the form-based code, we did reduce the parking requirements in districts like this from 2 cars per unit to 1. We did that for a couple of reasons. One in particular, though, and we also, by the way, allowed for properties on residential blocks to get credits for parking that was along their street. So in essence, a lot of properties wound up having no parking requirement. And really the reason for that was to allow people to add to their houses or get permits without having to comply with the parking code. The goal was not to have people having to do curb cuts and build driveways. And the hope was realizing what a walking community Narberth is, that we would be able to cut back on the amount of parking in impervious surface. So I'm not sure what the question is referring to in terms of parking overlay, but that was the significant parking change we made when we passed the form-based code. At the time, it was noted that in South Narberth is a little bit more of a mix than is being discussed here. It is largely single family, but there are a good number of twins in this neighborhood. There are a few apartment buildings in this neighborhood, and then there are a varying number of multifamily houses. Some, interestingly, over time, some houses get subdivided, some get recombined. So there's a little bit more of a mix of houses than purely a single family context. I'll point out that I did assess these houses, these buildings that are being proposed, and they actually are in scale in terms of their dimensions, their width, their depth, their building coverage with some of the larger twins that exist in the South Side right now. So I think that they certainly are very close to consistent with our code, except for a few things I pointed out, and that's if you consider that our code would apply to the whole property. So short answer is I don't know whether they could have been built before, but they are very close to being consistent with our code now. And they're very close to being consistent with the kind of houses and kinds of buildings that you can find in South Narberth now.
Okay, I think we've gotten through that. This is the part where it gets interesting. Now I think we're ready for deliberate. Normally under our planning commission, this would be our deliberation. Each member on major projects, each member would make their comments. There could end up being discussion on the points of the conditions of approval. We are fortunate in that we do have a document prepared in the memo on conditions of approval, so we can react from that, or our members can make any suggestions if it doesn't reflect their wishes. On the Narberth side, I know I'm sure you guys have your own method and desire, but we have the applicant here, so splitting off would be difficult as well. But at the same time, we're 2 hours and 20 minutes in. So I think I'll let you speak, Todd, if you feel we can, and Chris as well, feel free to chime in. If we could proceed and maybe just do our deliberations together or make comments, we can go down the row for, include each planning commission. I think if everyone does their best to keep it as succinct and direct as possible. And then, see where we lie between the two municipalities. Obviously, one municipality could, make one recommendation that's completely opposite to the other, and then we're I'm not sure we're any better off than where we started. So what do you folks think of that approach?
That sounds appropriate to me. I think that's efficient, but I do know it's important to give each of our commissioners an opportunity to discuss this. So I think going around,
absolutely,
and I think it's very important for us to hear each other's questions, across both planning commissions or comments. So I think that's a good way to proceed.
Okay. All right. Do we flip a coin for who goes first?
Scott, can I just point out there is one more hand raised for public comment. Deborah Lonsdorf.
Yes, and she did have a Q&A posted. So I think we'll shut it down after that, but I'm happy to hear Deborah's comment.
Yes, hi. Thank you for taking my comment. I appreciate it. And I would like to say that, and this is no offense to the developers. I understand developers and what they're trying to do. However, my comments are directed to the planning commissions. I believe this is an inappropriate development for Narberth. We had originally 2 buildings proposed here, and now all of a sudden we have 3. Clearly there are already flooding issues. Clearly from the comments, you can see there are parking issues, and this impacts the homes on Woodside, and it impacts their quality of life. And there are serious environmental issues here. Now, I have noticed that in Lower Merion and in Narberth, developers really do get the benefit of the doubt. And I realize that there are codes and that they just try and follow the code, and sometimes they wiggle around the code. But I would really like the planning commissions to do their job for the residents here and take a look at the quality of life issues. Between the 3 buildings with the 12 units, there's a threat to Woodside Avenue. And, I'm sorry, Todd Bressi, however, you don't live on Woodside and you don't really live on the South Side. So I don't think you really understand. This is a community here of 5 streets. It's a small area. And the threat to Woodside Avenue and the increased traffic and the flooding issues, this is a project that that threatens that quality, our quality of life here. I live on the south side, like on Chestnut, which is just like 2 blocks from where this area is. And I really mean no offense to developers. I understand where they're coming from. I'm in real estate, but they're not what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with my neighborhood and the look and the feel of our community. And I think this is a mistake, and I don't know how to work around this. I imagine this project will move forward in some fashion. However, I would like to request that if it does, that the developers be required to create some kind of wildlife refuge in the area to minimize flooding and to support the flora and the fauna. You know, and this neighborhood it's really not that much of a mix. It's single family homes all along there. We have a couple of big apartment buildings that were built a very long time ago. I disagree with Todd Bressy's analysis of this. There are 5 streets over here, as I said. So, you know, I don't know what else to say. I really appreciate your listening to me, but it's of a great concern here with all of this development. And I really think that Maureen McGettigan's comments should be looked at very carefully of the Lower Merion Conservancy, and maybe we can come to a compromise here that will be beneficial to everyone, because the residents really do deserve a lot of consideration here. And I am very concerned about all these driveways coming off into Wynwood. With that, I'll sign off, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. So my egalitarian desires would have us alternate back and forth with each one making comments, but I feel that could be awkward and not be a good way of exchanging. So I actually wouldn't be opposed if my colleagues would agree if Narberth wanted to lead and you know, at least run through their initial comments from their commissioners, as I think the other some substantive issues, and I think we actually heard from more residents on that side probably than the other. And I think when we get to the Lower Merion side, where there's more precise details that we're looking at, that's more geared towards the frontage and the traffic access and the pedestrian, although certainly all the issues do apply. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? I know that when, you know, and I'll make my comment about the Civic Association issue when it's my turn, but I don't know whether Mr. Frumhold has had a chance to consult with his client about whether or not they are willing to table the application until they've had a chance to meet with Shortridge. If they had, then that might affect the order and kind of how we proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rosenbaum. The answer is yes and no. I've exchanged a couple of texts, and I'm probably in the worst position that I can be, simply because Mr. Falcone says to me, "Do what you think is right," and I'm aware that we have tabled this on a couple of occasions, and I think for good reason, good purpose, and it's been helpful certainly to us and hopefully to the community that we have tabled it. I think having listened since you first asked the question, and having listened to all of the comments that have been received by the planning commissions, I think we've probably heard about everything. We haven't heard from any of the people who really are the most proximate neighbors in Lower Merion, directly across the street in the apartments there, which have a very different feel to it and kind of hover over this site a little bit and kind of influence this site. I don't know that there are any people that we are likely to hear from there. The concerns of the people in Shortridge, and I'm pretty familiar with that area, I think have been expressed and probably largely relate to the 2 issues that are of greatest concern to the planning commissions, namely stormwater management, which we'll be getting into more, but there are strong code provisions in both municipalities that really protect the public interest there, and we need to meet them. And traffic, and we have had, I think, a fairly comprehensive and robust discussion of those traffic issues and concerns, which really I don't think are going to change, and ultimately PennDOT will be chiming in. But I think our driveways, as have been explained by Chris and by Frank Tavani, are well positioned, having gone through several iterations of where they might be. We're talking about relatively low traffic volume. So my preference would be that the planning commissions, and let me say, we've got double the brain power from people who are really familiar with these kinds of issues. And I'm saying all of the planning commission members of both municipalities. We've got the Montgomery County Planning Commission having greater input than I think is typical. We have two engineers who are very engaged in this, both from Pannoni's office, but two very able engineers advising. So my preference would be, unless Mr. Falcone overrules me, that we're in a position where we would like to go ahead and have that recommendation. This is only the tentative sketch phase. We will continue to communicate with the Civic Association, and there are others. I mean, these conditions that are before you require that we have continued communications with other interests, the Lower Merion Conservancy, PennDOT's going to be involved. So my preference would be that the Planning Commission consider this and make a recommendation. But and I hope that's a fair answer to your question.
I guess I'll make my comment when I make my comment. The one thing you said that I just can't agree with is that we've heard from the same interests. I don't know that the folks that are on Woodridge have the same concerns that people are on Shortridge. And to me, residents aren't all the same. Everybody has their own different way of looking at this. But I'll hold off on making my comments.
Right.
Unless your client wants to reconsider about tabling, which I think is the right thing to do at this point. But my personal
thank you. And by saying the same interest, obviously they come from a slightly different perspective because of their locations, but the traffic and the stormwater is what I was really referring to.
All right, Todd, would you like to lead Narberth through your comment period or discussion?
Sure, thank you. Well, at this time, what we normally do is I just open the floor for our planning commissioners to give your reactions and thoughts and inclinations. Recall we are both being asked to vote on recommending or not recommending this project, and we also are being asked to consider whether we would like to recommend to our council a similar set of conditions as to those which Lower Merion has developed for its commission to consider. I'll ask out of respect for the time and the fact that both commissions have other items on their agenda to try to be as concise as possible. But I'm very curious to hear what people are thinking. Normally I just don't call on people, I just wait to see who jumps in. So would anyone like to jump in before I call on anyone?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Thank you.
Somebody's got to take the first hit. My impression of this project is that it is a shameless effort to maximize the take from a piece of property that is environmentally sensitive, inherently dangerous, and that has been held in abeyance for as long as I've lived in this area, which is close to 50 years, and is only now being cashed out by its owner. I think it's being done without due respect for the community that surrounds it. I think there are inherent dangers in the circulation. I think there's inherent danger in the precarious positioning of paved areas and developed areas on the site with respect to the floodplain. I think that the creation of more retaining walls in that area behind the buildings is an invitation for for disaster for little children who may live there. I await the detailed design to see how those dangers will be mitigated by the designers who will presumably address those issues. But I'm very reluctant, regardless of having seen a great improvement in this project over the many weeks that we've been looking at it. I feel reluctant to approve something without knowing what the real traffic impacts are going to be as evaluated by PennDOT particularly. I have a hard time thinking that they're going to smile upon the curb cuts that are being proposed here. So I find myself in a very ambivalent position. And with that, I will await comments from others.
Who'd like to go next? Jim, I see you down there in the
All
corner.
right, sure. I'll go next. So I think I have 5 areas of concern about this. Definitely the traffic inflow and outflow it's hard to picture how that will work. I'm unclear on whether we're asked to make a final judgment on that, but it doesn't seem to me like this is something that's advisable to suggest. I remember what this intersection was like before the traffic light. Traffic light makes this area 100 times better than it used to be for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for drivers too. And introducing these new driveways and these new no left turns and these new traffic flow through Woodside and Maple doesn't sound like a good idea to me to even suggest doing that. As far as being environmentally sensitive, I know the flooding potential. My wife and I looked at a house in this area once, and we could see the flood marks in the basements. I know this area does get flooded, and the stream is environmentally sensitive to runoff. As I was saying before, I think there's way too much pavement and parking on this area, both for runoff issues and also it's just plain supplying too much parking. We only require 1 space in Narberth per unit. It's not prohibited to supply more, but the basic philosophy is you supply less, you'll get people living here who need less. That's my personal belief as well. And just as a remark about the old code, which would have required 2 parking spaces per unit, I'm needless to say, I was not a fan of that for the reasons I just stated. This satisfies our old code a lot more than it satisfies our new code. This supplies parking way above what I've ever seen any development supply for residential parking. And a couple of specifics as my last 2 concerns. On lot 4, I have that concern about the footprint of the building on lot 4, apparently too big for the lot. And then also just back to my concern about lot 3, the frontage on lot 3. I was just trying to figure out with a ruler. I appreciate that this lot sort of fans out and gets wider the further you go back. And it could well be that at some point it's 70 feet wide and will support this kind of frontage build out. But I can only see that it's maybe between 60 and 62 feet wide. So just as a point of correction, I would like to see that frontage, the lot frontage measurement confirmed, because I don't see it defined on the plan here. And I don't see where that larger figure is being measured from. All these things combined, I'm inclined to vote no on this because it's a sensitive area. I don't think I'm inclined to give to cut corners on this in any way. So, unless the applicant was going to take it back and retool it a little more and satisfy some of these small points and larger issues, that's sort of where I am right now.
Dave, that's your hand up.
I primarily second and third the comments by the two Jims. Probably my primary concern is, of course, the traffic. I think unless you put Jersey barriers or something in the middle of Wynwood Road, the urge to make a left turn exiting the site will be irresistible. And I think that's a recipe for a lot of problems if this was implemented. I also take exception with the amount of parking. When we wrote the new code, we spent a lot of time and effort thinking through how we can minimize the paving over of the borough. This seems to be going in the wrong direction. And while I appreciate the need for some visitor parking on the site, I think that this is in excess of what's really called for and is really moving in the wrong direction, especially on a site, as been mentioned often tonight, that's environmentally sensitive, stormwater sensitive, wildlife sensitive, to introduce so much impervious paving and coverage on this site, I think is a real mistake. I'm also, when I saw this plan and I saw somehow the project went from 10 units to 12 units, I admired the creativity of the development team, but I still am left, scratching my head thinking, if 10 units was acceptable in the first submission, why now does there need to be 12 units to make this project work? I think that just generally it's an overdevelopment of the site and really needs to be scaled back. And finally, I'd mention the ability to get along Indian Creek on Lot 2. In the past months, I've spent a lot of time walking along Shortridge Park and along the creek there, and have really come to appreciate being able to get close to the water. I think this is a real opportunity. We spoke many times when we were putting together the new code about finding walking paths through the borough. This seems like a wonderful opportunity to be able to get close to the creek and to extend the walking system and tie it in with Shortridge. And I think that would really enhance the project. And I would hope that some thought would be given to that as the design progresses. So I basically agree with Jim Spear and Jim Cornwell. I thinking that this is a real overdevelopment of the site and really needs to be rethought.
Heidi, are you still there?
Yeah, and I appreciate what Dave was just saying, and Jim, the two Jims. When we saw the first project with the two larger structures, my initial comment was they're just too large for the neighborhood. And when I first saw the new plan, I thought, well, 3 smaller structures does seem to fit better. But I've been squinting at the plan during this whole 2.5 hours, and those are really big buildings. They're still really big buildings. And in agreeing with what Dave was saying about 12 units, I mean, I think that's really the thing here that's making all those buildings so big and requiring so much parking. If there were fewer units, there would be fewer cars. If there were 2 smaller buildings, which was really what I was seeing, we saw the 2 big buildings. I thought, well, we could have 2 smaller, multifamily houses. I mean, these are supposed to look like a multifamily house, but the typical multifamily house in Narberth is not as big as this. I'm even looking at the biggest ones I can think of. There's one on Narberth Avenue near me, and I think of that as a huge house. And I just looked at it on plan view, and it's half the size seeming as the footprint of these. Now that doesn't say that the design of these buildings ultimately could be made to look smaller just by virtue of the fact that it's not a 3-story all the way across. You know, there's sections to it. There may be a 1-story section or another portico or another roof. But that's my big concern, is that these buildings are still massive. And the other really important comment that I have is regarding the front yard. I think that they're way too close to the street. There's no room for street trees or, large canopy trees, which really this site would benefit from, just to calm down the feeling of this area of Wynwood. Why do we want to have buildings right at the face of Wynwood Road? What's the purpose of that? I mean, a nice development would be one where maybe there's one driveway in, it kind of meanders around, there's a cluster of smaller homes back there. I mean, I can appreciate, as Deborah Lonsdorf was saying, this is, if it's going to be a development that's going to be worth the developer's while, it's got to have a certain amount of development in it. But I still have a hard time believing that there couldn't be a reasonably scaled development back here that would be satisfactory and fit into the south side. That's my comment.
My reaction to this is I have a knot in my stomach when I think about this project. This was a site that we hoped that no one would ever build on. It was called out in the borough's open space plan as a place where there was a great opportunity for an easement because of its watershed values, because of its open space values, and the borough never really acted on that recommendation. And so it gives me a knot in my stomach to think that anything would be ever be built here. And it gives me a knot in my stomach to think that a resident of Narberth would sell their property to allow such a thing to happen. This starts with the owner of 3 Elmwood, who is selling their property to obtain a price for it, which is going to result in the construction of something like this. And so I've really, ever since this came in, I've had a real knot in my stomach about it. I think that as far as an application goes, this one has proceeded admirably from the first ideas that were proposed. It's been very important for me for us to make sure that if anything is built here, that it conforms as well as it can with our code, as if our code applied to the whole site. And it comes very close, really, except for the number of units. While these are big buildings, they are not inconsistent with the big buildings that you see in South Narberth in terms of their form. Now, most of the bigger buildings that you see of that size have 2 units because they're big twins, but they're really the same size. So I think in a way, these buildings do reflect what the form-based code is being asked to generate. It's just that this is not a site that is really appropriate for any kind of development, really, and it should have been dealt with years ago. So I'm torn about this. I think that the project is moving along well. I think that there are extraordinary concerns about the traffic, and I guess we have to wait to see what the traffic studies say. And I hear what the traffic counts say, and it's the kind of thing that's hard to just sort of, based on experience, really really accept is that's how things will really work. So it'll be interesting to see what the actual studies come up with. I think that the way that the site has to be engineered with retaining walls, a massive amount of grading, a massive amount of landscaping is really it's a testament to the attempt to build something over the capacity of this site, and it's a shame. And I think that I do think, though, that Chris Lesswing's point that this is an opportunity really to improve on the public investments along the watershed that have been made in Shortridge Park and in Narberth Park is very important. So I am unhappy that this has come to us, but given that it has come to us, I think that there's steady progress being made. And I guess what I'm mulling over is what kind of progress do we need to see in order for this to be acceptable. I've asked in conversations with the applicant, I asked tonight, I think it would be interesting to redouble the effort to look at the number of units. I think that it will be important for Lower Merion and Narberth to work very aggressively on how the floodplain is treated and how it's designed and how it's managed. I don't even think removing those walls and restoring it to naturally flowing should be off the table, quite frankly. I think that we have to take, and I hope and trust Lower Merion will do this, a very hard look at not so much whether traffic will queue on Wynwood Avenue, but whether or not traffic will be diverted into Narberth or Shortridge, really, to accommodate the traffic movements that can't be made on the street. So I respect the work that's been done. I respect the effort the applicant's been made. It's become a much, much better project than when I first saw it, but it's a fundamentally flawed site, and it's one that it's very troubling to see that that we have to look at a project like this. I would like to ask, before we shift over to Lower Merion commissioners, because I think they should have a chance to respond, react. Do any of the members of the Narberth Planning Commission have any comments on the conditions that have been proposed by Lower Merion staff? The 43 conditions. Okay. Well, those conditions really do encapsulate, a lot of the sort of further need to kind of further explore some of these issues that we've looked at, like the stormwater, like the floodplain management, like the traffic and so forth. So you might want to take another look at them. I'll turn it back to you. Lower Merion. Scott, would you like to?
Yes. Yes, thank you, Todd. So I think it would be best that we'll go through our board, and thank you for holding off on your final recommendation, whatever. And I think hearing both boards is very useful at this time. So let's go through the rounds. Anyone like to volunteer to go first on Lower Merion side? Adam?
Yeah, so I don't know how much I'm going to add that's necessarily not been raised before. I mean, I actually am a resident of Shortridge. I live across the street from this development. And so obviously my role is not to comment as a member of the public. I'm a member of the Planning Commission. So I do think actually there are some differences in the way that our neighborhood is going to feel about this. I think that there's particular concern. We've addressed stormwater. But I think there's particular concern on the impact to the park. And I think a lot of our neighborhood, particularly during the pandemic, have relied on the existence of the park as a means for ourselves and our children to get outside and be remotely sane during the past few months. And so I'm very concerned about not just once the construction is complete and there is a parking lot there, but also just what the construction is actually going to look like. And how much impact to the stream there's going to be, and whether our kids are going to be able to enjoy the water and splashing in the way that they have. Again, it's not things that I don't think are capable of being addressed, but I do want to raise those concerns. I also do want to flag again, I'm very concerned about where the traffic flow, if we're going to force a right-hand turn out of that driveway, is going to end up. I'm very concerned about the impact to not just Narberth, but also my neighborhood and the folks that live here. I hear everything everyone said about the 12 trips or whatever the number is, but I'm still not convinced that, you know, on these streets where you have kids biking and people walking their dogs, that's not actually a pretty profound impact. But that being said, I agree also that this plan seems significantly improved from what we've seen at earlier phases. That's all I have right now.
Adam. Bill.
Yeah, once again, I think, you know, a lot's been said, and I think a lot's been covered. What I will say is that as a planning commissioner and as commissioners, our responsibility is, you know, to the existing codes that we work and make decisions from. That being said, I would speak for myself, but probably for pretty much everyone else who's a commissioner. The reason why we do this is because we do have concern and love for our community, and we want it to flourish and do good. And we live in a community that is primarily built out, and these kinds of infill developments are extremely emotional for people who live in and around the area. And this particular site is problematic. I think that is, everyone knows that, including the developer and everyone involved. And so there's going to be a lot of emotion. There's going to be a lot of difficulty in pushing something like this through. But as commissioners, I don't know if we have the right to deny where we are right now based on what the developers have done and presented to us. You know, I'm not going to say this is a by right development, but they have worked with the township staffs to adjust these plans and to make this a better development than it started out at. What I would say is that through the rest of this process, our goal is to, if we can't stop the development, to try to make it as good as possible and to address the concerns that everyone has surrounding the major issues, which are traffic and the environment. And so I think that you know, if we can all focus on those things, that we can do our jobs and create as good a development as there can be. Short of the township or the community getting together and paying the owner of the property to not develop the property, I don't see where else we could go at this point. So that's what I got to say. Thanks.
David, George, Jerry. Oops.
I'll go if nobody else wants to go. I mean, I think everything that's been said has been extraordinarily sensitive and articulate. And I think what Bill said is correct, that if, you know, kind of by right, if we can't refuse it, then all we can do is try to make it as good as we can make it. I've lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years, and I've biked, I walk a lot. I take the train. For 30 years, we only had one car. And I live near Marion train station, but it's interesting. This site is, you know, sort of halfway between two train stations. And yet, you know, I think Narberth has raised the issue of why is there so much parking on such important piece of land for this flood area. Is extraordinary that somebody wants to have 24 or 22 parking spaces. So I think we should just continue to try to make it as good as we can.
my concern is, and it's been raised by other members, is that I think Chris started out talking about that this is more like the houses on Wynwood Road, that there's now 3 individual houses versus, 2 bigger buildings. But the scale of these buildings is, and I think the space between them is really unlike anything I know really on Wynwood Road. And so, I mean, I think one of the approaches could be that, in fact, that that it could read like one big building. And I'm interested to know why that kind of hasn't happened. That has a kind of facade that stretches out quite a long way, so it doesn't pretend to be, 3 houses, which I think is disingenuous with what it is we're trying to do here. I think it should be really one large building. I don't mean large building, I mean it can be broken down, but it should read as a building on a curve, and that it's the 3 what will be kind of goofy looking big houses. I think has been the wrong approach. So I would say much less parking. I would say that it shouldn't be any more than whatever the units are. There should be 1 per. It should be the Narberth, and maybe a couple of visitor parking spots to reduce the amount of asphalt as much as possible. I'm not. One of the things I've felt about this site for a long time is I never really knew, because I wasn't part of Narberth, I'm part of Merion, that I never knew what it was. And it's always struck me as being this, I thought it was owned by the rail lands or something, because it's just always been this big overgrown, piece of ground that nobody ever took care of. And so now there's an opportunity, if it can't be a park, which I don't think it would be a very good park, then at least let's make it something that is better than what it is. And I think to just deny it is just won't work, because by right the developer can develop this piece of property. So as Bill said, unless somehow Lower Merion and Narberth can come up with the money to buy it and make it something else, then I think we have to just move ahead. By the way, I think the driveways are a real issue. I've had an accident a long time ago, 20 years ago, on that intersection. It is extraordinarily dangerous. And I think to have an ingress and egress in the collector lane of the lane that goes underneath the bridge is just, I don't think it's satisfactory. Maybe you could make the right-hand turn after the left-hand turn, or the turn in could be the turn in could be as you're heading towards around the curve. The turn in could be the second, could be the entrance, and you could be leaving, closer to away from the bridge, or away from the tunnel. Sorry, I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone.
Thanks, George.
Scott, you want me to go?
Sure.
For those who haven't attended many of our meetings, George and I don't often agree, and this is another opportunity for that to occur. I think when I first saw this project, I had a couple of reactions to it. One was that it reminded me of the Ballackinwood Shopping Center apartment building that was built in my area, it was a really stupid place for a building. And yet, through that process, we ended up with a much better apartment building than we would have. Nothing that I've heard tonight has convinced me that this is a good place for an apartment for a multi-family building. It is significantly better, in my view, than it was when it was first presented to us, because it makes an attempt not to be a large apartment building. And I like the four buildings. I like the way that part of it looks. I think there's been a lot of improvement. And so to that extent, I strongly disagree with George. I think, it is important to, and I come back to what Chris said at the beginning, that, there are certain issues that we address at tentative sketch, and there are certain issues that we don't. I think that to the extent that traffic and stormwater management are affected by where you put buildings and how you orient them, that is, an issue that's sort of fair at this point. And I find it very troubling that the developer has come forward with a tentative sketch without having sat down with a civic association. And as much as I think they've done great improvement, this reminds me of a cake that is half baked and not entirely done. I could easily see myself voting in favor of a tentative sketch, but not without them sitting down and getting feedback from a civic association, and the fact that it is in a location that is troubling, that has many of the issues that have already been discussed. I think gives me great pause. The other comment that I want to make is really about what was said by the Lower Merion Conservancy. I thought they made a lot of really good points. It was a long list. And a number of those things were things that I sort of felt like they were tentative sketch-like. Where you put trees and paths and things like that. And part of the reason why I sort of feel like they've got 2/3 of the way towards a decent tentative sketch is that they haven't addressed issues like some of the ones that were raised by the Lower Merion Conservancy. So with the understanding that my vote ultimately will be influenced by the fact that they didn't meet with the Civic Association before coming forward, I would once again urge them to table it until we get their input.
And Jerry, do you have any comments?
No, I have nothing else to add to what I said earlier about the development and what others have added since then. So just in the interest of time, I'll pass on any more comments.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll finish up from the Lower Merion side, and I've been writing down a list of things that I would just want to point out, and I'll skip past any that are already stated. In the summary of things, if this development didn't happen, I'd be completely happy. It's an odd piece of land. It's one of those, you just look up and say, why? Does it, do we need this one? That said, all the points made on, we do have laws here and rights and zoning, and if they can follow that, and I'll reiterate the amount that the applicant has worked with governing bodies to make this a better plan is admirable and worth commending. That said, so I don't see all of the negatives that have been pointed out if I look at this objectively. I think there's pedestrian improvements that come with this plan. A wider sidewalk, further set from the curb, is much safer and more desirable with the street trees that there are, and the verge landscape around it is a benefit. Yes, you're crossing two curb cuts, but they're not the largest curb cuts and not a high traffic volume. So I think that's a benefit there. The design, it's been stated, has been much improved. I fall on the side of that. I think I agree with Todd from Narberth that the scale is not that much out of character. They are probably a little bigger overall than the neighborhood, but you could argue, it's also kind of a transition where you have apartments on the other side of the road. They're 21 feet wide, with the exception of the end units, which is kind of a typical townhome and twin width, and there are some within that neighborhood on the Narberth side that represent that as well. The traffic impact, I'm also not as concerned. Even though it's 4 lanes turning onto it, I think the applicant, the engineer Chris Young, made a point I agree with. It's turning onto a 4-lane road. It has its challenges and whatever, but it's no different than any other situation. Even with the dedicated right turn, I think the signalization does help, and the natural way that things work around there. I'll await the traffic impact study, but it doesn't scare me off as much as it might have otherwise. The parking, this is a tough one. It is a lot of spaces, but because there's nowhere else to park, if we reduce spaces, then we do send more cars into other neighborhoods. And one thing that wasn't mentioned is, you have more cars turning in and not having a space and then coming back out. And then you're increasing what isn't a lot of units overall, relatively speaking, and you're increasing number of trips that go in and out of this site at a location where we don't want to see as many as possible. So the impervious surface is also, that's my biggest negative, and the stormwater impacts. I think that's an issue pushed to preliminary land development phase to get into more detail on, but I think it is the most legitimate concern to come out of this, and the number one reason why I prefer not to see this developed. Lastly, the number of units, 12, that number doesn't bother me either. If it were 8 or 10 in bigger units, I like that they're quads, that we have different types of housing in our communities. I'd say missing middle, although that usually implies some more affordability, which I know these won't be cheap. But at the same time, it does offer more diversity in housing stock, which I support. That said, you could get rid of a unit, especially one of those end units, or 2 units, one building, and I think the site, reduce a little impervious, add some more stormwater controls in that extra green space, and I think it's a much stronger proposal. And again, the developer has been very willing to look at things. I'll ask him to look one more time at something like that. It may be enough to put it over the finish line if that's what they want. That's really kind of where I stand. And I am more focused on the front half. I respect Narberth's concerns. I think they have the most important concerns, given both the neighborhood adjunct to it, as well as the impacts. But we all share, I think, common concern and interest.
Mr. France,
yes.
Could I address briefly, having heard, and let me say first, we appreciate all the comments. I would like to get back to Mr. Rosenbaum, who has nicely asked me on at least a couple of occasions, maybe 3 now, whether we would consider tabling this matter for, and I think his reasons are legitimate and understood and appreciated. I think, having heard all of your comments, particularly all of the Narberth comments, which I think were fairly stated more critical than some of the Lower Merion comments, although there was constructive criticism across the board. I think that we would appreciate the opportunity to be able to digest all of these comments, to meet with the Civic Association, as has been requested of us, and see whether we can still further improve the plan. There's been a lot of juice that's been squeezed out of this orange, but hopefully there's some way we can find a little bit more to make this well, I'll call it a better plan. And so with that, we would agree to table. We'd like to be in a position, assuming that we are able to do so, to be back before you a month from now and see what we've been able to accomplish in the meantime.
Scott, do I get to thank him?
Well,
I really appreciate that. That's really, I think that's a very fair thing to do for the neighborhood, and I personally really appreciate it.
Chris, if you wouldn't mind, is this how do you feel about this strategy?
I think it's a great development. I think there has been a lot of really good comment tonight. There are some issues that I think are important to many members who attended the meeting tonight that could certainly be fleshed out between now and January. I think with having both staffs fully mobilized and having all the resources of the county, I see no reason, if this doesn't have significant revisions, that this shouldn't be able to be brought back in January.
I don't think this will take a second, but I think it is fair for the benefit of the applicant and just for closure here. Were there any conditions of approval that are already proposed from the Lower Merion Commissioner's side of things that people have a major problem with or think are lacking from those, just so we can at least get any more constructive criticism out of our 3 hours tonight? I don't have anything myself.
And I will add, we're very open to continuing to discuss this with those who are interested, which include each of you.
All right.
I just want to ask our planning commissioner, so essentially, are you satisfied with the outcome tonight that we will table this for further discussion? Or would you prefer to have a vote tonight?
I would accept the tabling.
Anyone opposed to accepting or tabling this application for the applicant to consider it further?
I would propose to accept the tabling. Do I have to make a motion for that or?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just want to hear if anyone objects to that, if you're itching to vote. I prefer to let the process play out another way.
I do like to vote, but.
We'll have a motion to table this until the applicant has requested to table this and to, I assume, to grant an extension on the time of review.
Right.
Who would like to make the motion to table this at the Narberth Planning Commission?
I will so move.
Do I have a second?
I will second that.
Cornwell seconds. Jim Spear makes the motion. Any discussion of this motion? All in favor of the motion? Aye.
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 Okay, so we have voted unanimously. Jim, we've given you a chance to vote at your last planning commission meeting. So there you go. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Narberth. Chris, do you need anything from us on that front?
I think we've given the direction. You'll accept the applicant's request. The applicant will send us an extension and we'll move this forward next month.
Yeah, we'll provide the extension, Chris.
Thank you.
Well, I'd just like to offer my appreciation to Narberth and their collaboration. This is, it's not easy, and it was and it takes some time, certainly. Not that we want to do every time, but this has been really, I think, worthwhile, and I appreciate what you brought to this meeting, frankly.
Likewise, too. We're sorry to keep you up late, though. Thank you, everyone. We are going to adjourn the Narberth Planning Commission for a few minutes and then rejoin on our other Zoom channel, which is advertised on the agenda. So thanks again, and we'll see you again in January, I guess.
Thank you. Good night.
See you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I sent him the link. So I think in the spirit of time, we should just get going. So it is now 9:20, and we will reconvene the December meeting of the Narberth Planning Commission. Thanks so much, everyone, for your persistence. What's the right word that we're looking for? We have 2 members of the public and borough engineer Eric Johnson and planning consultant Maggie Spear with us tonight. The remainder of our agenda is announcements and updates. We do have one important order of business, which is to vote on the omnibus zoning code amendment. If we wish, we can take up further discussion of Jim's ideas about the 3B district, but let's see what happens after we get through our the things we need to take care of. So the first thing I'd like to do is move to agenda item number 2. Dave Brower's with us now, so all 5 planning commissioners are present. Approval of minutes from November 2020. Hopefully you all received them probably this morning or yesterday, I forget. Does anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from November 2020? Jim Spear makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, Heidi and Dave. So we have a second and third. Is there any comments, corrections, discussion of the minutes? No comment that they were half as long as usual? Okay, thumbs up there. All right, all in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
No, okay, so they were spell checked one more time and posted on the borough's website as soon as I can get to it. Chair's update. I wrote 230 Haverford Heritage Action Plan. I should also add Jim Spear. As most of you know, this is Jim Spear's last official meeting of the Planning Commission. I anticipated this would be a very long meeting and asked if we could sort of formally acknowledge Jim's service. And also, we don't know what's going to happen, whether with an appointment or whatever. So I asked if we could formally acknowledge Jim's service at our January meeting. But I will take the opportunity, if that's still okay with you, Jim. But I will take the opportunity just now to thank you, Jim, for your efforts. You became a better planning commissioner every month, and we're really going to miss you. And we know you work really hard for the borough, so we know you'll be doing good things no matter what.
Thanks.
In terms of 230 Haverford, the applicant is, as I reported last month, reorganizing to come back to us for a formal presentation of the tentative sketch plan. I know that the applicant would like to have some internal staff meetings. I have not heard more from them about when those might be. I did ask if they wanted to make any presentation this month, and they said no. They'll be back in touch with us.
When you say internal staff meetings, do you mean with Narberth staff or among themselves?
With Narberth staff, and I've asked for us, one or two of us, to be involved in those meetings as well. Keep you posted about that. I would like to add, in terms of my update, I spoke with Matt West today, who will be the interim borough manager, to try and guide him through Elmwood, what was happening. And he said that one of his top priorities is going to be to try to put a little more rigor around the land development review process in Narberth, in terms of traffic intake, traffic, and making sure applications get to the right people and the right commissions, and that letters are collected on time. So at least he recognizes that we've been having that. And I've offered to meet him at any time, any place, just about anywhere to work on this with him. And I think we all would benefit from a better understanding of how paper gets moved around and so forth. So that's promising news. With that Heritage Action Plan, I'd like to start that report by saying that last month's council meeting, November 18th, I believe, I appeared to speak about the zoning code.
Todd, you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, I'm not sure about that because I am sitting still. I'm not moving.
Yeah.
That's one of the. You can't look at me anymore. I'm sorry. Anyway, the council did vote formally to ask us to move the Heritage Action Plan higher in our list of priorities. They are interested in having us report to them very vaguely what action on a preservation ordinance would mean. And so I've taken advantage of that to say, let's just bring them a draft preservation ordinance. And so all of you know that in various ways we're mobilizing to do that. Maggie has worked hard to figure out how she can devote time to this while she's busy supporting the parking task force and trying to get the saldo completed. And so we appreciate very much Maggie's work as our planning consultant on that. Kathleen Ablenow, who's on the meeting, I believe, is also able and eager to help us as a resource. And I have had phone calls with Corey Cagarisi as well, who has something pretty much ready to send us in terms of a kind of template to use. And I know there have been questions, why don't we just adopt something from one city or another and run with it? It's because the things that were adopted from one city or another were adopted in a different time and place, potentially under different kinds of municipal charters, or when our understanding of the field or the law was different. And they also were developed in particular for specific situations. So there's a lot we can learn from them. We could potentially look at them and rewrite them, but we will also have Corey's resources with us, and he will be able to join us at our meeting in January to walk us through what an ordinance would look like. So I think we're very close to having something. Kathleen Abelnaup will lead a walk of Narberth, Kathleen and Maggie, in a few days to kind of think about what would a historic district would be. My only ground rule there is that we work from the Planning Commission's recommendations from January, which kind of outlined what we think the scope of a historic preservation ordinance might be, and what the area of consideration might be, to use that as the starting point. So that's my update on that. I will ask, I know some of you, Dave, Heidi, you've been involved. I know Maggie and Kathleen are on the line. Respecting that it's 9:30, any of you have anything you'd like to add to this update?
Todd, this is Kathleen. We're going out tomorrow at 1 p.m. So I think most of you guys were on the email. And I think, Todd, you said two max for Planning Commission.
Yeah.
So we'll look forward to seeing whoever's interested in coming tomorrow.
Yeah, I was planning on being there at least for the beginning of it.
Okay.
But if there is a second and a third who wanted to go through the whole thing, I can beg off after just saying hi, so we don't have any more than two.
Okay.
Kathleen, I would just like to know what your plan is regarding walking the borough. What do you mean?
That's a good question, Heidi. So I have mapped out what I see as sort of a proposed or tentative boundary for the borough. So I think that what we're going to be looking at are just the edges right now, and then considering what contributing and non-contributing resources would be within that line at a later point. So I don't know if we'll be able to get the entire perimeter walked. I think that's going to be challenging, but I figured starting at an edge and actually I probably should have thought of a better starting point than the train station, because we're not really going to be looking at the interior at this point. It's mapping the outer boundaries of it, but it's just a walk right down the road to get there. It's actually Haverford Avenue. So that's what I see happening, but it may be a 2-day kind of thing. So maybe we walk half of it. Maggie, I don't know what your sense of that is, or how much time you have. It'll get dark by 4 o'clock-ish or 4:30.
Yeah, I mean, just with the light, we should probably plan on wrapping up by 4 o'clock at the latest. But yeah, Kathleen, I'll follow your lead for this, especially because you already have a game plan kind of lined up. So we'll just get through as much as we can, and then if we need to go out again, we'll make a plan to do that. But I think it's important to achieve the deadline that we've set out, that we should get as much progress done as we can.
Yeah. And I think what we're really going to be looking at are stretches of some of the major roads where we'd be drawing out of the boundary altogether, and just making sure, referencing the maps and then doing it on foot, that we've got that right, and then fine tuning it. Once we have a better understanding of what we're seeing on foot.
Well,
does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I guess. I mean, I guess the real question I have is, and Jim Cornwell, maybe you could, and Dave, both of you were on the early 1993 preservation drive to put together an ordinance. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this, because at that time we were talking about the whole borough was an historic district, and that maybe at this point we're talking about pulling sections or buildings out that don't contribute to that it's not really a matter of drawing a boundary around areas. It's more about picking out buildings that don't belong or shouldn't get the scrutiny that the major part of the borough would get from a harb.
Well, I guess my first thought is there are clearly areas, and I'm thinking mostly on the Montgomery Avenue corridor, which need to be taken out of the district. I don't see this as being this kind of micro-grained looking at building by building. And selectively taking individual buildings in and out of the district. I think it's where there are areas where it makes sense that it should not be in the district, then they be taken out. What I don't know off the top of my head is whether we're thinking about if there's some distinction between the commercial area and the residential areas. Yes, for me, it's a matter of there being a certain urgency to this, because these developers aren't sitting around, and politely waiting for us to come up with something. So, at the risk of being a bit of a bull in a china shop, I don't think we could afford to spend 6 months, manipulating the minute nuances of the edges of the district.
There are some very obvious areas that would be drawn out along Montgomery Avenue, along Wynwood Avenue, where you have 1960s and 70s development, and not just single homes, dozens of homes. The Haverford Avenue presents a different challenge, and that's something that Corey and I spoke about at length the other day when we were talking about contributing and non-contributing resources, especially some of the buildings on the south side. I think that's a topic for further discussion. And at the moment, I think that our goal is just going to be figuring out what the outer boundaries are, and then, coming back to the Planning Commission and allowing the Planning Commission and Corey to go through some of the finer tuned issues with what the borough ultimately wants for the commercial district. What your goals are, what your comp plan says about it, what the vision for it is. So I think that's something that we can think about. It doesn't have to be tomorrow.
And Heidi, I just want to clarify, your question sounded like it might have something in your question just made me think that I just need to clarify this point. We're not tomorrow going out and picking out which of the buildings are qualifying as contributing or non-contributing. We're simply identifying the boundary now, and then we come up with parameters for regulation. And then based on that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kathleen, but at that point, then we can identify which are contributing and non-contributing. But there's just the process for establishing anything has a defined set of steps that you would need to take. And so the boundary definition is one of the first steps that you would take prior to actually identifying any specific properties.
Yeah, I think that's right, Maggie. And we'll have a rough period of significance. Maybe we take this through 1930 or so, maybe a little bit later, just so that we can cover all bases. That's something that I think that we'll talk about tomorrow. And then, defining the boundary based on the presence or absence of those resources or large blocks of infill.
I guess what I'm really just asking is, isn't there a process by which anytime a demolition request is made or application is made, that it would be run in front of a HARB, if you want to call it that, or some kind of review committee that says, that it doesn't contribute to the historic district because of these things. I mean, it's just, it's a different way of looking at it. I mean, we have an historic preservation ordinance, and then you can, if an application comes up, you take a look, you know, I mean, that's all. And it's probably something that's pretty easy to do. It's a box you can check, and then the applicant can go on to do what he wants to do. I'm just thinking that, you know, as we're suggesting, it could take a long time to get something written and a HARB created if we spend too long figuring out a boundary. I mean, yes, Montgomery Avenue may be an obvious one, but I'm not sure what else there would be.
Well, you have to justify.
Why pick that out? Why pick that out? Why not say if somebody wants to buy a property on Montgomery Avenue and tear all the buildings down, why wouldn't that go in front of somebody to look at it and say it's not contributing?
Because you have to justify what your boundary is using your period of significance and a narrative that sets out, you know, why are these resources significant? Why are they important? Why are they in a local historic district? And along Montgomery Avenue, my feeling is, and you know, Maggie, you can, I know that you'll lend some valuable thought to this tomorrow, is that most of those resources, even if they're early 20th century and they date to the period of significance, are too compromised to be considered. They don't convey the association with early 20th century development, residential. They're retail, they're commercial, and they're, you know, heavily modified. So those are all of the considerations, you know, you have to look at when you're thinking about what resources to include in your boundary. You know, I think that's probably something that Corey will want to contribute to with this conversation, but the boundary has to be certified by the state in order to be approved at the end of the day.
Yeah, so Heidi, I understand your question. So we're not just spending time designating a boundary because we want to. That's the legal process.
No, I understand all that, but I just don't understand why we're not making all of Narberth, make it simple. All of Narberth is a district. So what I don't understand is the definition of boundary. I mean, if we're saying there's some buildings along Montgomery Avenue that don't contribute, I don't understand what the walk is for, because that's the only section that right now we're talking about. It seems pretty straightforward.
There are multiple sections that we wouldn't be talking about. Anything that was built after 1940.
Like the Sabine School, which I find contributing. So how, you know, I don't see how you can draw a line on a date like that. I mean, a 40 or 50-year-old building isn't contributing. I'm not buying that. That's my problem with it. I don't think you can say that right now. I mean, there's too many unknowns out there, and we're not going to walk the whole borough every street. So how can we, I don't understand why we can't make the whole district an historic district, the whole town.
That is exactly what happened in 1993.
I know, and we have a whole recommendation. We have a long report that's basically the precursor to an ordinance that was written then. It was very well written.
Thank you. I wrote it.
Did you write it?
I did.
I just pulled it out yesterday or the day before. Dennis and I are looking at it and going, this is it. I mean, you know, this could be turned into an ordinance.
This was it.
A HARB.
And that was then.
Yeah.
Well, what I just heard from Maggie is we can't do it because it won't pass muster with the state. And there are obvious places, you know, at least around the perimeter of the borough, which, you know, are clearly not historic. You know, whether it's buildings that were built within the last 30 or 40 years, you know, or have been so altered, you know. But you know, my problem again is the urgency. You know, if it takes 8 months to get it from 95 to 98% good, then we need to move on this thing. We just can't get so mired in the minutia that we don't get this thing done.
Right.
I'm not concerned about getting, weighed down with the minutia. I think that drawing the district boundary, maybe it's a philosophical difference. First of all, the state will not sign off on a boundary that includes 1970s buildings in it. Typically a building needs to be 50 years old in order to meet the criteria. And second of all, the state's going to be looking for something in the narrative that justifies the boundary, and it has to hang together for a reason. Whether it's based on a shared history or a shared architecture. And I think that what we've seen, or at least I've seen going forward, is that Narberth, the development history of Narberth, the really significant part of it dates from the 1880s through about the 1940s, when nearly the entire borough was developed. And then after that, you have infill development that occurs in the 60s and 70s. There obviously, we have questions about whether we want the apartment buildings to be contributing. I think a lot of them will be. There are 30s and 40s era apartment buildings, but I don't see a district with every building in the entire borough being included.
Yeah, but no, wait though, Kathleen, that doesn't make any sense, because I've seen plenty of historic districts that are like the whole downtown, and they don't say because this building is new, it's not part of it.
It's not a contributing resource then.
Right, but that would come out when the application is made to tear it down.
No, that's not really how it works. It's a process by which those standards are established before before an application would actually come to the borough. So it would be labeled contributing or non-contributing based on whether it meets the criteria and has a significance that's associated with that period of significance. I don't mean to be getting into the weeds here, but
no. But so that's a description that can be included as text.
Yeah, I mean, every single building eventually has to be called out as contributing or non-contributing. So that does take time. I mean, we will, when we establish this district, at the end of the day, every resource has to be called out as contributing or non-contributing. And that goes into an inventory, so that the officials or the government commission, the HARB, or whatever you want to call it, when they're looking at an application that comes forward, if they're looking at a non-contributing resources that's within a historic district, they will be able to approve a demolition.
Kathleen, would it be a reasonable process to draw a line around the whole borough as the district, and then be subtractive about those buildings which are non-contributory?
Well, Jim, so essentially that's kind of what I've done
in a subtractive way rather than
what you can't do is you can't poke holes in a district. So you can have non-contributing buildings in a district, but you can't have like a donut hole with, that's drawn entirely outside of the district. What you're doing is you're drawing a boundary around very obviously non-contributing or buildings that you don't want in the districts. The ones that are inside that boundary but aren't significant or are not related in any way to that significance would be considered non-contributing. So I have a map tomorrow that I intend to give you all with some ideas for a line that would go around really the entire borough, but with some sections, some large chunks that are drawn out of it, like on Montgomery Avenue, in the business section, like with some of the development on Wynwood Avenue, which is 1950s and 1960s. I mean, I think that's where the majority of it happens. Oh, Montgomery Avenue, where Hanson Court is, that's all 1980s development. So you get that initial boundary, and then you start scouring it. And it is, it is a time-consuming process, but there's no way to get around that.
How would a boundary encompass something like the Price House on Montgomery? That's, arguably the oldest building in Narberth, or the most historic building in Narberth, but it's surrounded by nothing in particular.
Yeah, that's really an interesting question, Jim. And that's something that we'll need the assistance of Corey Kegery with, because that one's actually not even as difficult as a couple of buildings up in the old Libertyville section, like where Mary Jo Daly lives. And that's, and then there's like near Aviva, there are a couple of buildings that really should be in the district, but they're surrounded by buildings that are clearly not within that narrative. But there are these kind of rules when you're drawing a boundary that you can't isolate resources. So we'll have to figure out how to do that, because those buildings, like the Price building, should be in there and will be in there. I think we just have to figure out how we draw that boundary so that it makes sense.
If it helps you, it's like spot zoning, where you can't just identify one particular property and apply a zoning district to it. It has to be contiguous and related to the other properties that are also zoned in that same district. So it's a similar application of that logic. And then, so it's, I don't think,
well said, Maggie. Thank you.
I don't think, Dave, to your point that I mean, we're aware of the timeline. We're working towards it. So we're just, trying to figure out the best way forward. And, we are constrained in some respects by the state's timeline, because this isn't just something that the borough can adopt by itself the way that other ordinances could. So we're trying to get all of our ducks in a row. So when we go before the state for approval, that we won't have to go back and redo any of this. So we want to get it done expeditiously, but we also want to do it correctly so that we don't add extra time by having to come back and amend it and redo it.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, one thing clear, Kathleen and Maggie, if we have an update next month in January, if Corey comes, it might be good to kind of organize the process, the description of the process, so everyone can kind of follow along what has to happen and where we are.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It can be confusing. It's a long process, so we'll make sure that we do that.
Can I ask a question? Maybe this is not a good time to ask this question, but what is the, sorry?
9:49, so you tell me if it's a good time.
Oh. I don't know. This is what strength of result are we aiming for here? Will we have identified properties that cannot be torn down, or will we have identified properties that just have sort of a checklist of, consider these things before you tear them down, or consider these things before you alter them, or add an addition or something? I'm sort of unclear. Like, there's been a lot of concern about residential teardowns in Narberth, but of the 3 residential teardowns since the zoning code was adopted, I can't really conceive of a historic protection that would have definitely saved them, would have 100% kept them standing. And I worry that that's sort of the expectation among people who are hoping for a quick historic protection over most of Narberth or much of Narberth, is to stop residential teardowns. And I think those two goals they conflict in a way. There are definitely historically contributed houses and buildings in Narberth that are very valuable. And then there are small houses that are, that are not wanted as real estate by end users. So I feel like there are two vastly different topics, and we haven't really identified which road we're going down. And I'm worried also. I'm just worried about the expectations among residents, among property owners, among people who would like to see historic preservation, that we haven't really properly defined the outcome.
Well, it is a pretty blunt tool, Jim. This will be more or less a demolition prohibition on any contributing resource within the historic district boundary. So the borough council would have the opportunity to, or will have the legal right to deny a demolition permit to contributing resources in the district unless they meet one of 4 or 5 different criteria that are commonly used in preservation ordinances. So, economic hardship, and there's a long definition of what that is in this proposed ordinance. Health and human safety, neglect that's so dire that their future reinvestment in that property is, an impossibility. And, obviously those are things that the borough council will have to take a look at. But that's essentially what it is. These are demolition prohibitions.
Yeah.
The issue, of course, I mean, to your point, Jim, it's always a concern if the general populace does assume that every single building is going to be protected in every sense of the case, in every case. So there could be some consternation when a property is not deemed contributing and comes in for a demolition permit and is granted it. There's something called the certificate of appropriateness, which is something that the reviewing agency, if it's a HARB or some other named entity, would allocate, and then council has some say in here too. So this is just going to be an ongoing, I think, conversation with residents to inform them on how this process is working. So I think Todd's request that we have some sort of kind of timeline of what this process looks like, and then what it looks like on the back end when it's adopted. Often we hear the form-based code was supposed to have done XYZ, and well, if the form-based code wasn't in place, then this wouldn't have happened. So we hear a lot of the what if scenarios, and I want to make sure that we can tackle this process by kind of getting ahead of that narrative and providing clear education to everyone as to what this entails, what it means, and then recognizing that there are going to be some properties that are not deemed contributing and therefore get torn down. So I feel like we're still going to hear the disappointment from people that we went through this whole process to adopt it and we're still having buildings torn down. There's only so much we can do, but this is going to be the best tool that we have to moderate that and to preserve the things that we've determined as being contributing. So your point is valid. Tear downs are still going to happen, but will happen in a much more regulated way with this in place.
And on the flip side, Maggie, there are going to be people who are concerned that they won't be permitted to demolish, and who believe that their homes are not historic. And so you'll see it from all sides, I think.
Yes, and I think that was the big hold up when this was happened 20 years ago, was the concern that this would place too much of a burden on property owners for not being able to amend their property in a way that was appropriate. So you're always going to hear both sides of the coin whenever it comes to government intervention in private property usage, which is why we believe that the approach that we're taking now is going to result in a stronger, more legally defensible ordinance than by taking something that already exists somewhere else, because this can get into some tricky legal grounds And we believe that the model that we have working with Corey is going to be a much stronger and more appropriate use of this tool in the borough than if we had just slapped something else together.
So to the extent that a historic preservation ordinance is hoped to stop or cut back on residential tear downs, I guess I would request, I mean, this is my last meeting, I'm not going to be participating in this, but I would suggest that maybe Planning Commission take a look at the 3 houses that were torn down, and it sounds like one more at least is coming, and what a prohibition on tear down would have meant for the people who own those buildings. What would they have had to do? What would the owner of former 338 Dudley, what would she have had to do with the property that she had? What would the owner of 10 Sabine have had to do to keep their property standing? To make it saleable to the next end user rather than sell to a tear down developer. There are economic impacts for those people, and it can be a question of who's going to pay. Is someone going to be forced to put structural money into their very small house to make it saleable to the next owner? And just since that's what we're talking about, residential tear downs in one set of conversations, I think we should do sort of run the scenario about what would have happened to those properties.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that would yield some interesting results. Obviously we can't go back and change those, but that might help us, as we're developing some of these, to understand how this is applied in real life to real life scenarios, and do a little bit of a test of it. So yeah, that's possible.
Someone in the background wants the meeting to end.
Yeah, I haven't had dinner yet, so.
Me neither.
My son was jumping in 2 minutes from work. He's been like, "Why are you still here?" So I think it's super useful to have this conversation so we understand how the process works. But I'm just also mindful that it's 10 o'clock and we'll have more opportunities to talk about this. So unless and you'll all have a chance to talk to Maggie and Kathleen, whoever shows up tomorrow, have a chance to talk to Maggie and Kathleen more. Can we move on to, is it okay if we move on to the next agenda item? Which is, I do appreciate everyone who's going out for the second time in 20 years to try and bring this home. And I hope the outcome is better this time. The next item on our agenda, we have written down here, MCPC update. Is there anything about the SADA we really need to know, or can we just move on?
No, we're still working on it. We're on the design. We have a meeting in January, and we'll keep chipping away at it.
Okay.
The design section, Eric's giving a thumbs up. Honestly, at this point, a lot of it's going to fall to him. So we're gonna tug on his heartstrings a little bit more over the next couple of weeks as we dive into the design section. So yes, we're still working on it, and next meeting is in January. So we'll keep working on it.
Thank you. The next item in our business is the Omnibus Zoning Code Amendment. It doesn't have a number yet, but it is something we were working on all year long. It was submitted to council in November. At the last meeting I discussed a little while ago, did vote without any real discussion to advertise this zoning amendment. And so it comes back to us in a kind of formal way for us to make a recommendation to council about it. It also goes back to Maggie and MCPC, which has to make a recommendation, and it will also be the subject of a public hearing at some point. I don't know if the public hearing has been scheduled. Normally council just does this on the day of a council meeting, and they hold a public meeting during a council meeting. I'm not sure if they have to do this in January. They might be able to, December, they might be able to take a final vote in January. So what I'd like to do is ask if anyone would like to raise any issues, questions. At this point, it's fairly well cooked. changes might mean that the thing has to go through the process all over again. So I have actually flagged one thing that I think we need to bring to council's attention, which I'll bring up in a minute, but has anyone else flagged anything they'd like to discuss before we call for a vote on this ordinance? The one thing I flagged is there's actually a redundancy. One provision is listed twice. And so I think we need to ask the solicitor to remove the redundant provision. It's provision X, which is on page 17 in my version, but it's provision X, which pertains to, I believe, the facades of mixed-use buildings, which actually repeats something which is in provision O, which is about the mixed-use building type. Provision O 14 is the same as provision X10 in this, and so I would like to recommend to the solicitor that he strike the redundant. I'm not sure why we didn't catch that.
That sounds like a typo, so that doesn't sound like a major deal.
No, I think subtractive changes are fine. It's more about additive changes that are an issue.
It's anything that would change it substantively. So I think removing a redundancy would not necessitate a revision or the re-advertisement of the public hearing process.
In fact, it probably doesn't even mean anything because this ordinance gets codified and it would just get codified. So,
yeah, that's the other benefit, is that with the E-code codification, they should hopefully catch those as well if it does get sent to them. But that's I will be issuing a review letter, as Todd said, and so I can also make that comment in my review letter, so that also gets put into the public record that will request that change.
Do you flag anything else, Maggie?
I haven't gone into it in super detail just as of yet. I have a couple other things that are more pressing on my plate right now. Since the hearing isn't until January, I do have a 30-day review period to write my review letter, which just came in last week. So I'll probably end up getting to that closer to the end of the month, but that'll be ready in advance of the January meeting.
Okay, great. Would folks like to wait until we get Maggie's letter in January and vote on this? Are you interested in voting on it now? So the public hearing is in January, Maggie.
Oh, I don't know. I cannot confirm that. I was just told by John Walco that there would be, it seems that the answer is yes. I think he said, but I don't know if he said if it was going to be a public hearing or if just council would be discussing it. I don't know if they've authorized advertisement of this ordinance amendment yet.
They
so I
did.
cannot.
They did off.
Okay, so then that would lead me to believe that the public hearing would in fact be in January at the council meeting, most likely the first council meeting of the month, maybe the second. But it's usually, I always get my numbers mixed up. It's a 30 or a 45-day review period that's required for ordinance amendments. So that would make sense. If they authorized it for advertisement, then it's either the 30 or 45 day, and then it would be the next council meeting following that time period. So January sounds correct, but I cannot confirm specifically which date it will be.
Okay, well, would someone care to make a motion to recommend these zoning changes? Is anyone willing to do that?
Sure.
Mr. Cornwell moves to recommend the zoning changes with would you care to have your motion include the striking of the wayward section X?
It probably would be advisable to do so.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion to approve this except for the striking of section X?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Heidi, is that a second? Or was that?
I saw her second.
Second.
Oh, your hand wave. Sold. Lady at the desk. $12 million. A new house in Narberth just for you. Old tear down. Okay, so any further discussion of the ordinance? Further comments?
You have beaten us to death.
Okay, so all in favor of recommending the council that they approve this zoning ordinance?
Aye.
Aye.
Hey, congratulations. Work well done in 2020. Okay. There was the option of picking up the conversation about building coverage in 3B zones. There's also the option of adjourning. I want to.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
I do.
That's a tough one.
Well,
on that, and it's his last meeting. So.
Yeah. So I'm happy to come back and present my stuff as a member of the public at a future date, if that's okay.
That would be. We'd appreciate.
Okay.
It. We're now at 4 hours. And I appreciate your work on that. Okay. Well, then we do have a motion to adjourn from Jim Cornwell. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Is there any public comment? I'm sorry. I see 2 or 3 people who are not commissioners. Is there anyone I see any further public comment? Okay. So there being no public comment, we'll then ask for a motion to adjourn. Jim Cornwell offers the motion to adjourn. And who seconded that?
Second.
I think we should let Jim Spear.
All right, I'll second that.
I defer to Mr. Spear.
I'll buy that.
Bring it close to his career. And all in favor? Aye. Okay, so we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we will be back at it with the same applicant in January. So expect more.
Good luck.
It's good. Good.
Thank you.
Jim, best of luck.
Okay.
Thanks for being on the planning
Thanks.
commission. It was great
Yeah.
working with you.
It's been
Yeah.
fun. Thanks. Thanks
Yeah.
for everything.
And
We're gonna miss you, Jim.
I'm sure we'll see you.
Yeah, he'll be
Yeah.
Don't be a stranger.
I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't move.
But we'll see him in January.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Okay. So long.
Okay, good night.
Happy New Year, everyone.